And jobs could be at risk across the UK after 2 high street chains were put into administration. The owner of Claire's and the original factory shop say last-ditch measures have fallen through. They had already undergone restructuring when they were bought by investment company Modella Capital last year. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed above 10,000 for the first time in its history, up 53 points at 10,004. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.15. LBC weather, a clear and cold night for many. Patchy snow in Scotland, possibly moving into northern England and Wales at dawn. Lows of -12. A bright day for Wales and central and southern England tomorrow. Cloudier elsewhere with snow showers in northern England. A high of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and a happy new year to everyone. And given it's a new year, we thought we'd do something a little bit different on the show now. So you can actually watch this show, the whole show, as well as listen to it. So if you have access to Global Player, the LBC app, the LBC YouTube channel and the LBC TikTok channel, you can watch the whole 3 hours because we're nice to you like that. Aggie Chambré is here. She's going to be talking about Venezuela in a minute. So you can see her in all her finest glory as well. What more of an incentive would you need? Right. I don't know about you, but I woke up on Saturday. I did have a little bit of a lie-in, so I got up a bit late. I could not believe what I was listening to on Matt Fry's programme. He was covering the live events in Venezuela, what had happened over the previous few hours. And we all know what happened, that President Maduro, I say president, I should say president in inverted commas, Maduro, he was seized, kidnapped, apprehended, whatever adjective you like to use, they're all applicable in this by US forces. And he's now, this afternoon, been facing an American court in New York City. Quite astonishing turn of events. But I want to talk in this hour about the reaction of the United Kingdom to these events, because I would expect the Prime Minister of a leading power to be quite definitive in what he thought about it. But he gave an interview to Laura Kuenssberg, which was recorded, I think, on Saturday afternoon, where he said, well, we just need to wait and see. We need to get all the facts together. Well, we knew what the facts were. He didn't need any other facts. He said, well, I haven't spoken to Donald Trump. He's got a press conference at 5, so let's wait and see what happens in that. After that, what has he actually said of importance? Do you actually know what Keir Starmer thinks about this? I think it is quite incredible that our Prime Minister seems unable to say, yes, I totally agree with what Donald Trump has done. President Maduro was a brutal dictator and he needed to be deposed. And I'm fully behind what President Trump has done. Or he could say this is a plain breach of international law. I think it's an absolute disgrace. I do not support these actions. Obviously, we value the American alliance, but this is one step too far. We don't agree with it. He hasn't said either of those things. He's sat on the fence. Doesn't it make you proud to be British? Well, he may have to come off that fence, or maybe he'll stay on it if there is a vote in the UN Security Council. There was a meeting this afternoon that lasted a few hours. There was no resolution put down by any of the other Security Council members, including China and Russia, which possibly says something. So Britain actually hasn't had to take a stance. But if it did, what do you think its stance should be? Should it vote with America? Should it vote against America? Or should it abstain? 0345 6060 973. Aggie, you've been following the events of the afternoon. I know Yvette Cooper's been making a statement in the House of Commons. Has she been any clearer than the Prime Minister?
No, I would say that Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, has not gone further than the Prime Minister or indeed the UK's representative in the United Nations Security Council. The points that they have both hit are effectively they were no fan, that's probably an understatement, of the Maduro regime. They had been clear about that over and over again, and that the UK wants to reaffirm its commitment to international law. But by saying that, they are not going any further than that and suggesting that Donald Trump or the US broke international law, although
even Nigel Farage has done that.
Yes, but other European leaders are actually in a similar place to the UK. And it's interesting that you say that they may have to take a stand. They may be forced to at some stage, but it does sound like if there was going to be a vote in the United Nations Security Council, actually the UK would choose to abstain. That is how keen they are to not, at the moment, at this stage, take a position on international law. But we can sort of start this story in New York, Iain, because as well as being where Nicolas Maduro's court appearance was this afternoon, the court has also played host to this meeting of the UN Security Council that I just mentioned. And at the start of that meeting, the UN Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, Rosemarie DiCarlo, read out this statement.
I have consistently stressed the imperative of full respect by all for international law, including the Charter of the United Nations, which provides the foundation for the maintenance of international peace and security. I remain deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regard to the 3 January military action.
And Iain, you mentioned the Prime Minister, what he had said earlier today. So he was asked this morning if his government does believe that what the Americans did in Venezuela was legal.
International law is really important. It's the framework, and it's for the US to set out its justifications for the actions that it's taken. But it is a complicated situation. The most important thing is stability and that peaceful transition to democracy.
And yesterday, another of our LBC colleagues, Lewis Goodall, was told this by another member of the Cabinet, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones.
The means is unconventional. There's no denying that. It's for the American administration to explain the legal basis for having done it. The UK
sure, but do we support it?
Well, it doesn't matter one way or another because it's happened and we were not involved.
Surely it matters. We're a UN Security Council permanent member. Surely it matters what we think. Do we support it or not?
Well, the UN Security Council is going to meet this week and the American administration will have to set out the legal basis for the operation.
Are you saying that your own government's view about this matter doesn't matter?
No, I'm saying that we need to see the legal basis for the operation that the Americans undertook. They've not published that detail yet. I'm assuming they will do at the UN Security Council this
Would the
week.
British government do this?
Would we do...
Yeah. Would we do what they've done? Would we remove a foreign leader in that way?
It seems unlikely, but we don't know the legal basis for the operation. And as I say, until we've seen the detail of that, we can't really speculate.
And in the last half hour, MPs have been told the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has spoken by phone to our Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper. This is what she said about their discussion.
In my discussions with Secretary Rubio, I raised the importance of complying with international law, and we will continue to urge all partners to do so at every stage. It is, of course, for the US to set out the legal basis for their actions, and the UN Security Council is discussing Venezuela this afternoon. These issues will continue to be matters for international discussion.
It is probably unsurprising, Iain, that Yvette Cooper was also getting questions from Labour backbenchers, people like Emily Thornberry, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, asking difficult questions, and questions I think the government's not that keen to answer, about why the government won't go further and call this a breach of international law.
Aggie, thank you very much indeed. Let me just read you out something that Margaret Thatcher said after the US invasion of Grenada in 1983. Those of you of a certain vintage will remember that. She was outraged. And she said this: "We in the Western countries, the Western democracies, use our force to defend our way of life. We do not use it to walk into other people's countries, independent sovereign territories. If you are pronouncing a new law that wherever communism reigns against the will of the people, even though it's happened internally, there the United States shall enter, then we're going to have really terrible wars in the world." Now, that situation is not totally analogous to what's happened over the weekend, but there are some parallels to be drawn. But for everybody who is criticising Donald Trump for doing this, I would urge them to listen to the voice of ordinary Venezuelans, because I have not heard a single Venezuelan voice saying that they regret what Donald Trump has done. Now, I'm sure there must be some, but I was watching an Instagram reel this afternoon where an Irish guy who's married to a Venezuelan man was saying, like, whatever you think about Donald Trump, just listen to the Venezuelans. And then his husband then gave his view, and it was very, very clear that he said he didn't have a single person in his family circle, his friendship circle, that didn't support what the Americans have done. And I think sometimes we need to bear that in mind. Well, let's speak to Luisa Ramirez, a Venezuelan political scientist who's a contributor for the Caracas Chronicles. And Luisa, I think you left your home country to move to Germany when you were 18 because of concerns about crime and economic turmoil there. I think around 8 million Venezuelans have done the same thing over the years. What's your immediate reaction to the events of the weekend?
Hi, Ian. Thank you so much for having me here today and for letting me speak as a Venezuelan. So my immediate reaction was of shock, even though we knew that this was a possibility, considering what has been happening in the Caribbean for a few months. But I haven't known another regime. I'm 29. Chavez came into power in 98. I was 1.5 years old. And Chavez did drive the country into an autocracy. And I simply haven't known any other regime. So I'm still processing the fact that the man who had so much power over us this last year is now under custody from the United States.
Is what I said about the reaction of ordinary Venezuelans accurate? I mean, what about all the people from your own country that you are in contact with? What is their general consensus on this?
You are absolutely right. So we agree, and we're thankful that this man doesn't have control over us anymore, that he will hopefully pay for crimes against humanity and many other crimes he's responsible for. He's not the only one, of course. The other people in the regime are also responsible for this. So it's a great day. I mean, it's a great moment to see him under custody, and we are happy, but we also know that this is going to be a process and there's still much to come, and we're going to remain active.
What do you make of the fact that the vice president has now taken over? There are some people who think that she must have been in collusion with the Americans on this. Otherwise, why would they want to put her in the position of president rather than anyone from the opposition?
I mean, ultimately, the goal is and should be that the elected president is put under oath and actually takes power, because then Venezuelans' will would be respected. And we also agree that Maria Corina Machado is the opposition leader. Now, as I said, this is going to be a process with a lot of faces, and I think it has much to do with who right now has control over security forces and the military. I mean, it's a very complicated situation, as all democratization processes are.
Thank you very much for joining us, Luisa. That's Luisa Ramirez, a Venezuelan political scientist who contributes to the Caracas Chronicles. 0345 6060 973. What position do you think the British government should take? Because up to now, they haven't taken one at all, apart from, oh, well, let's wait and see. How courageous is that? 0345 6060 973.
This is LBC.
A Southern and ask for the Coast Guard.
I'm a real snack monster. But Mum and Dad says all that munching isn't good for me. Around half the sugar we eat comes from unhealthy snacks and sugary drinks. If you want to change from a snack monster to a snack star, search Change for Life for loads of healthy snacking ideas.
I've looked after my kids since they were born. Now they've got kids. I still want to look after them. I don't want them struggling to make decisions about my money or my health if I can't. So we made a lasting power of attorney. Now, if I can't speak for myself, they'll speak for me. It's a weight off for all of us, isn't it?
Yes, Mum. Lasting power of attorney. Search your voice, your decision.
You probably think you're pretty good at multitasking behind the wheel. I mean, you have to multitask to drive. So what's wrong with checking your phone? The thing is, your brain simply doesn't work that way. Even a quick look at the message, or firing off a quick reply, affects your concentration and makes you less able to react to hazards. If you use a mobile phone while driving, you're 4 times more likely to crash. Think. Put your phone away.
Iain Dale on LBC.
It is, what is the time? I can't see it here. It's 7:20 here on LBC. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see we've had a few issues during the break, but we're back on track now. Now, we're talking about what the British government's reaction should be to what's happened in Venezuela, courtesy of the Trump administration. Look, there's been a mantra that every single British politician has come out with, particularly those in government, but also in opposition too. No one will shed any tears about the departure of Maduro. Well, that is obviously a truism. Nobody in their right mind would do that, apart from the possibility of one or two people on the very far left of British politics. But can it be right for one nation to sort of depose the leader of another in this way? Because, I mean, international law is a sort of incongruous thing in many ways. Some people say it doesn't even exist because there is no statute, there's no world government, there's no world parliament that passes these laws. But there are conventions and there are rules that over the last, well, really since the Second World War, most countries have abided by. That has been shattered now. Now, you could say that, well, Russia shattered that also with the invasion of Ukraine, possibly. But if you are Putin, if you are President Xi of China, and you look at what President Trump has done here, well, that can only embolden you, can't it? I mean, Gideon Rachman from the FT, he tweeted this on Saturday. He said, so when China launches a special op to seize the president of Taiwan, or Russia tries to do the same for Zelensky, what exactly do we say? You can't do that, it's illegal. It's incredibly difficult to argue with that, isn't it? And surely that is something that the British government ought to be talking about. Otherwise, what's the point of having a government if it can't actually stand up for the international rules-based system? And even Nigel Farage has admitted that what Trump did was contrary to international law, yet the government doesn't seem able to even acknowledge that. What do you think the stance of our government should be? 0345 6060 973. Well, let's go to Anthony, who's in Wigan. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Well, it's basically, as off to Trump. Normally, CIA would give guns to the opposition and you'd have a massive civil war, takes years, thousands of people die, bang. No, he's not. He's gone through the front door. A bit of loss of life, a bit of damage. It's picked him up, took him out. Trouble is, he's done it for oil instead for the people. If he'd done it for the people, everybody would be clapping their hands. Well done, well done, well done. There's no international law. Russians, Israelis, and now Americans.
Well, you say he hasn't done it for the people. He would dispute that. He would say, I mean, he's been quite open and said, yes, it is partly about oil because Venezuela has nationalised American oil companies and they regard that as equally their oil as much as Venezuela's. And he's now saying that the Venezuela as a country will benefit from this. Now, you can say he speaks with forked tongue, but clearly if the American I assume it's going to be a temporary regime, can actually govern the country in a way that benefits the people, well, they're going to think that all of their Christmases have come at once after the terrible turmoil of the last 20 years.
Yeah, I agree. But it's like I said, Trump has basically said our oil, which he shouldn't have. And if he's been concentrated on just mentioning people and not said anything about the oil, then our government should stand up, well done, should have been done years ago.
Well, I don't think anybody, I mean, a lot of people in this country would have assumed it was about oil anyway, wouldn't they?
Yeah. But, as I say, if oil had to be mentioned, he kept his gob shut, which he can't do.
So what do you think the British government's response should be? Because so far, there hasn't been one.
They should back him, because it could be the best thing for the people at the end of the day.
But, say this does work out, doesn't that give licence to Trump to do it with Colombia, with Cuba, with Greenland? I mean, obviously, Greenland's a very different situation, but that really would bring down the international world order if he decided to. I mean, I always thought he was joking about Greenland, but it appears not. I mean, it's inconceivable that America could actually invade a fellow NATO state.
Yeah, but they've not actually invaded, have they?
Well, you can call it what you like. I mean, it isn't a conventional invasion as such, but I mean, it has the same effect.
Oh yeah, but nobody dies. No, very few weapons used.
No, I mean, it was remarkable that it was carried out with no American casualties whatsoever. I think some of Maduro's security people were killed, but I mean, that I guess is inevitable in this kind of operation.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, those type of security people will be the ones who, choosing the words, are nice to the fellow countrymen. If I'm not trying to not swear or use words I shouldn't.
Okay, all right, Anthony. Thank you very much.
Like I said,
let's go to Heather in Hereford. Hello, Heather.
Thank you. I don't want to waste a second. I really feel that international law has to keep up with what's happening in the world, catch up and reform. We don't want drugs in any of our countries. We don't want people getting away with this. We don't want people behaving like the mafia. We have a terrible problem with drugs all over the world, and President Trump, he's standing up to this, and doesn't it give you in my guts, I know he's doing the right thing. And he's had the guts to do something about it, to start something, to show the world that we're not going to put up with this rubbish. We're not going to be infiltrated and let these people just do what they feel like, and poison us all. It's time to do that. And international law has to get on and recognise that and do something immediately.
There is an argument, I think, in international law that he has actually done something that is constitutional, because he's defending the United States interest by stopping the narco trade of drugs going from Venezuela into America. And it's quite clear that's been happening to a huge extent, which is why if I was the Colombian president now, I would be very worried indeed about what might happen to my country, because we all know Colombia's history in this manner. So the fact that he's been seized, kidnapped, apprehended, whatever language you want to use. Apparently the BBC, all of their journalists have been told that they're not allowed to use the word kidnap. I mean, for goodness sake, we are not under those constraints at LBC. We can use whatever words we like. So I don't really mind which of those words that you want to use to describe this. But the fact is, he's being brought before American justice to account for his actions in effectively supporting the narco drugs trade. Now, I'm sure there are so-called international laws that cover that. So I think from that point of view, I think Trump may have a very good argument. But I do worry about what the long-term effects of that might be. Heather, thank you very much indeed. Paul's in Twickenham. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ian. Ian, I was just thinking about the phrase, we need to stand up to Trump, which I believe we do need to do that, and we're not doing it, and it's a disgrace. But the phrase stand up to, Ian, my recollection is it comes from sort of Victorian times, and it relates to the game of cricket, where the wicket keeper stands very close to the wicket, even when there is a fast bowler bowling. Obviously, normally the wicketkeeper stands several yards away, so he doesn't get hit so easily. Now, and so the point I'm making, Ian, is that to stand up to Trump involves risk. You're standing close to the wicket.
Everything involves risk.
He's bowling fast balls, and there's risk. And it's quite clear that Sir Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and nobody on the Labour front bench is prepared to take any risk at all, as they see it, in fighting what this appalling Mr. Trump is doing. And the other meaning that they use of stand up, to stand up for someone, one is reminded of the film Spartacus, where the Romans come to kill Spartacus, and his neighbouring slaves, they all stand up and say, I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus. It always involves risk, Ian. And I think the risk here is that if this isn't challenged very clearly and in a very salty fashion by the British government here, we are at the start, I think, of a very serious planetary situation. Wars and rumours of wars. We've already got poverty, famine and earthquakes and various other things. We need to be aware and watch it, and we need to stand up against this. I don't think ultimately we will defeat this tide of evil that's sweeping over the planet, but we need to stand up to it and nail our colours to the mast, Ian. And to watch the parliamentary debate that's gone on this evening has been utterly shameful to see the front bench, Sir Keir Starmer not even there, and Yvette Cooper adamantly refusing to criticise what Trump has done in any way, shape or form. It's quite astonishing. And Ian, final point, I think you're wrong to regard the joy, understandable and very understandable joy of many, many Venezuelans that Maduro has gone with the overall goodness or rightness of what's happened. I would have liked it if they'd gone in and forced the release of political prisoners, and actually. And then made arrangements for elections, then I could maybe just about have abided it. But what he's done, what Trump has done, is a wretched raid on another country, and it's no different from China and Russia, as has been widely reported. And I think we should stand up to him in the old Victorian cricketing sense. Take a risk. Call him out. Well,
you've articulated basically Ed Davey's position in that at least he's been consistent right from the start. He said that the Labour government needs to stand up to Trump. Starmer has taken a much more nuanced view and decided that cozying up to Trump was in Britain's best interests. But there is no halfway house here. It's like George W. Bush used to say over Afghanistan, you're either with us or you're against us. And that is the way Trump looks at these things. There is no sitting on the fence. There is no abstention. You're either with us or against us. And in the end, that's the decision that Keir Starmer has to make. I think the decision may well be made for him. If Trump goes for Greenland, I cannot imagine a scenario where a British government would not stand firm against that. And to be fair to Keir Starmer, he has actually said that today, that he would not support the United States if it did go down that road. Because that road, let's face it, is an incredibly dangerous one, because I firmly believe that if that happens, it will be the end of NATO. Now, you might say, well, that's what Trump has wanted all along, and you may well have a good point on that. I've always thought that it was a lot of rhetoric, but I'm not sure it is now. And if that happened, I think all the European nations of NATO would need to expel the United States from NATO. And then maybe we'd all wake up to the challenges that Europe and Britain face in the future. More of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 7:32 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
The Foreign Secretary has told the Commons the UK government sheds no tears over the end of Nicolás Maduro's rule in Venezuela. The deposed president has denied drugs and weapons charges in a court in New York. The Prime Minister has told LBC Greenland will decide its own future as Donald Trump renewed his calls to bring it under American control. Sir Keir Starmer says the only countries that can have a say are Greenland and Denmark, which is jurisdiction over the island. And a man who pretended to be a Royal Naval officer on Remembrance Sunday says he was seeking belonging. Jonathan Carley from North West Wales was fined £500 after admitting wearing an Admiral's uniform without permission in Llandudno. LBC weather, a clear and cold night for many. Patchy snow in Scotland, possibly moving into northern England and Wales at dawn. Lows of minus 12 degrees.
This is LBC. Dale on LBC.
7:35 on LBC. Now, in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister of Greenland, Jens Frederik Nielsen, has given a press conference about Trump's latest remarks. But first, LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, spoke with our Prime Minister this morning and asked him about Trump's insistence that the US needs to take control of the territory.
The future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And it's for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark only. Denmark is a close ally of the United Kingdom in Europe and a close ally in NATO. And so it's very important we stand by our ally and very clear about the future of Greenland.
And that's your message to Donald Trump as well when you speak to him next?
It's my consistent message in relation to Greenland. And so that's not a new position. It is the future for Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. They are a European ally, they're a NATO ally, and we stand with Denmark on this.
Yeah.
Well, before we come back to your calls, let's talk to Morten Rønnelund, who is a Danish journalist and political commentator who joins us live from Odense in Denmark. Morten, very good evening. I imagine this is leading all of the Danish news bulletins this evening. What's been the reaction from the Danish government and indeed in this press conference from the Greenlandish leader to Donald Trump's threats?
Well, first of all, the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has said that this is unacceptable. She has ramped up her rhetoric in disposing of the remarks made by Donald Trump. And just moments ago, I'm looking at a screen just beside me. Just moments ago, a press conference with the leader of Greenland just finished, and he also talked about the sovereignty of Greenland, but also, interestingly, did not mention Denmark or the Kingdom of Denmark at all. However, he opened up to some sort of negotiations with the US, not about annexation or territory, but cooperation. So maybe it's time for some sort of negotiation about new military bases, a new presence in the Arctic for the US, negotiated directly with Greenland.
It's a strange way to conduct a negotiation, isn't it? I mean, is there any speculation in the Danish media and among the Danish people that Denmark needs to deploy more military personnel to Greenland, just as a sign that you're taking this threat seriously?
Well, our Prime Minister says if that happens, if we need to show up with military to repel American troops, then everything ends. That's her words. So no one isn't expecting that. Everybody is expecting some sort of negotiation about something, we don't precisely know what it is Donald Trump wants or the Americans want. And that's the peculiar thing about this whole situation. There hasn't been negotiations, there hasn't been any talks, any diplomacy before this all erupted out in the open. And maybe it's those kind of talks they want to have now to kind of walk it back and de-escalate.
And presumably your Prime Minister is on the phone to her counterparts throughout the European Union and indeed to London saying, look, I need support from you here. Now, Keir Starmer has given her his support today and said that he doesn't believe that the United States has any justification for doing this, which is more than he said about Venezuela. What's the reaction in other European capitals?
Well, the Danish reaction is many European capitals have been kind of quiet. It seems every nation has their own agenda regarding the Americans and Donald Trump, and no one is in a hurry to get into other fights. So if you're not directly involved with Greenland, why say anything about it? Why enrage Donald Trump? You probably have your own issues with him, with your nation. And that's where the Danish PM wants more of the European leaders to stand behind her and more NATO leaders to stand behind her and be a united front.
But in the end, this could lead to the breakup of NATO, couldn't it? Because if Donald Trump did launch some sort of military invasion of Greenland, I can't imagine that the United States could stay within NATO.
Everything would actually end. I think our Prime Minister is right about that. What would anybody do about this if NATO collapsed? It would be like from one day to the other. What would the reaction be? Or should all other NATO states help Denmark, help Greenland, and wage into a war with the US? It seems unlikely.
Well, the only winner in this is Vladimir Putin, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. And maybe many European leaders are thinking, please, Trump, could you see this?
Unfortunately, I don't think he can for all sorts of different reasons. Thank you very much indeed. That's Morten Rønnelund, a Danish journalist and political commentator. Right, let's go back to your calls. Let's go to Cesar, a new caller in Clapham. Hello, Cesar.
Yeah, how you doing? It's my second time as I call it. From Venezuela, I would like to start my intervention to state that what happened in Venezuela was Saturday the 3rd. The United States stepped in, bombarding, took over. It's a more tangible example on how the capitalists take over any country in violation of the international law. Back in time, or to be more precisely, United States, before the 25 years ago when Hugo Chavez took over with his fake revolution, backed up by one of the major capitalist group who used to run in the media business in Venezuela, Cisneros Group, was in power Carlos Andrés Pérez by the second period of in office, and then Hugo Chavez backed up by this capitalist group who used to run in the media, Cisneros Group, TV, whatever, imposed him. He went through with a fake revolution. Then when he took over power, he never said anything about socialist or anything. Just when he get linked with Cuba, Cuba made link with China, Russia. These countries came and took over the whole Venezuelan natural resource and took over control about the fossil fuel business we used to be running for the United States. And then what's happening at the moment is the same history. Nothing changed. Nicolás Maduro is a bad boy, is a gangster who, instead to running in a clever way the natural resources of Venezuela, he decided to engage in a dodgy business, narco-traffic, and this kind of situation. The intervention of the USA, the truth, they arrest Nicolás Maduro, but the infrastructure, the people, the rest of the gang member is still on behalf, is still running the country. When I mention the General Diosdado Cabello, who at the moment is being recognized as one of the top leaders of the Cartel of the Soles. The brother of the Elsie Rodriguez, who is at the moment the interim president of Venezuela. What happened with Donald Trump is a simple deal that he made with Russia and China, because at the moment Russia and China, through the link that Hugo Chavez made with Cuba, same time link with this country who pretend to be a socialist, that they are no more capitalists, with use the fake faith to be a socialist.
So are you telling me that you think that Trump was wrong to do this, but you're glad Maduro's gone? Is that the essence of your position?
Well, what I'm telling you on the international perimeter, geopolitical speaking, whatever happened on South America, Central America, is USA backyard. This guy, he tried to make an idea. It's nothing to do with the human rights. It's nothing to do with the Venezuela population who's being starving, who are no medicine, and a really bad situation. What he's intend to do, secure an 100 years deal to administrate, to exploring the Venezuela fossil fuel, which represents the major reserve around the world, the Earth planet. Is just a simple business, capitalist.
All right, Cesar, thank you. Wesley says, I agree that Maduro was a criminal, but why didn't the US take him to the International Criminal Court in The Hague? Well, the US isn't a member of that. Is it because the International Court could impose an embargo on Venezuela's oil sales, which goes against Trump's plans for the oil? No, they wouldn't have the power to do that. After all, Trump did say that it was about the oil. Please explore this. I'm afraid, for once, Wesley, and you normally come up with some really, really good points, I'm afraid neither of those points apply, because America isn't a member of the International Court. So it just, your point falls by the wayside on that basis. Let me tell you who's on Cross Question tonight. We have the Labour MP for Halesowen, Alex Ballinger. He's also a member of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. George Freeman is Conservative MP for Mid Norfolk. John Nicolson, the journalist, broadcaster and former SNP MP. And Cindy Yu, contributing editor of The Times. They'll be here to answer all of your questions on Venezuela, Iran. Let's not forget Iran, because the protests in Iran have been completely eclipsed by this. They weren't getting the coverage I thought they deserved. Last week when I was standing in for James O'Brien, we did 2 separate hours on Iran. But I feel really sorry for all the protesters who are still protesting, but their voices are not being heard. So you may want to ask a question on that. Let me just remind you, the Cross Question is now on 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Keep your calls coming, though, 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, you can now watch us live for the whole 3 hours on Global Player, the LBC app, the LBC YouTube channel and TikTok. It's 7:46.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
With Nicolas Maduro up before the judge in a New York courthouse, how many other world leaders should be sleeping fearfully at night? Colombia, Cuba, Greenland?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
7:49. Someone says, I had no idea I could watch the whole show on YouTube. Switching it on now. Well, you couldn't before, but today is the first day, so all 3 hours of the show are going to be broadcast live in Vision on the LBC app, on Global Player, on the LBC YouTube channel, and of course, well, I say of course, and on TikTok. So no excuses now. You can watch the whole show. And of course, it's very easy to watch on YouTube on your smart TV. If you've got one, you'll know what I mean. Right, Tricia says, I've just turned in, so sorry if somebody has already said this, but I think the PM is walking the tightrope of trying to keep Trump on side for Ukraine. He's likely to go into a huff if he doesn't like what is said about his actions in Venezuela and just abandon Ukraine. Trump is not Reagan. There is no opportunity for disagreement without retaliation. That's Tricia in Edinburgh. Well, I think the ship has sailed on Ukraine. I mean, Trump has never really supported Ukraine, has he? You could say he's supported Putin for reasons that none of us can quite understand. Right, let's go to Shaz, who is in Streatham. Hello, Shaz.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Hi.
Okay, so there's a few things I want to touch on, but I just want to quickly touch on Greenland and what America is planning to do. Unfortunately, I want to tell the people of Denmark, Greenland is already gone. Trump will take it eventually. All they have to do is plant a couple of soldiers on there and put the American flag, and they will say Greenland is ours now. And all this you hear about people saying, "Oh, you've broken the law. You've broken the law, and this is not good." And this is not. Everybody will be quiet. Nobody will say nothing. And
I don't agree with you there. I think there would be severe repercussions if that happened.
They say it. Everybody says that, but when Trump will do it, when he does his move, it will be such a sudden thing that everybody will eventually go quiet. And the reason why he will do it, because there will be a bigger threat. The bigger threat is going to be either Russia or the inevitable challenge coming from China. And China it's not about if, it's about when. When will they go after Taiwan? And they are planning and waiting, and they're very patient. They're looking for the right opportunity to go in and take over Taiwan. And all the Taiwanese know that the Chinese military drills have been happening for many years around the island. And they practice, they say there's these drills, and then suddenly there's ships and planes flying over Taiwan. They're just going to one day say it's a drill, but it won't be a drill. It'll be in reality.
Well, that is the fear. But do you not think that the events of the last few days have made that more likely now, and that President Xi will look at this and think, OK, well, if he can do it in Venezuela, I can do it in Taiwan?
Yes. China were going to do this anyway, regardless of whatever Trump wants to do. The issue is America is already behind. The games have already been set. These are chess pieces. Trump is now moving the chess pieces that he thinks he needs to keep America as a superpower, to keep China at bay, to keep Russia at bay, because he doesn't want Russia to be this emboldened superpower, getting the minerals and rare earth metals from Ukraine. And on the other hand, at the same time, America wants to show strength. It wants to show China that, look, we can do this overnight, in 30 minutes, like 50 soldiers go in, take a president out. That country is ours now. And they were supplying China. Remember, they were supplying China with their oil. So that's a big blow for China. So I will see more chess pieces moving on the board, and these are to counter the Chinese and the Russians.
Well, it's a very interesting perspective, Shaz. Thank you very much for phoning in. John says, what is the point of international law and always obeying it when other countries break international law all the time without any consequences? Although it might give Russia and China another excuse, it won't change what they do. They break international law all the time anyway. Let's go to Hermes, who is a new caller in Newham. Hello, Hermes.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
So I am Venezuelan. I am part of the large Venezuelan diaspora in the UK. I came to the UK 23 years ago, and we have been crying out for help for over 23 years. And the international community has ignored us. And now, whether you like it or not, Mr. Trump was the person that decided to help. I know there are many views on the topic, but I equated to, imagine if I was a victim of domestic abuse, and I called upon all my neighbors to help, and nobody helped. And now the person that wanted to help did and kicked the guy out. Now all the neighbors are making a lot of noise saying he's the wrong person to help. But he was the only one that did. So what am I supposed to do? And I can't help myself. I can't beat the guy on my own. So what am I meant to do?
Do you know a single other Venezuelan who is against what Trump has done?
No, not in my circle of friends, not in the Venezuelan diaspora in the UK. My phone has been on fire for the last 3 days. We are all very happy. I am disheartened with the comments that Trump made about Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, but I'm sure that he misspeaks a lot. So, but no, the people that are really disheartened or brokenhearted because Trump did what he did is the typical leftists that only believe in human rights when it suits them. And I can see them all changing their Palestinian flags for the Venezuelan flag. And I just want all of them to keep out of the conversation because they were silent for 23 years.
Are you thinking, I mean, obviously this has only recently happened, so you've literally only had 48 hours to maybe contemplate this. But what would it take for you to think, I could go back to Venezuela and rebuild my life there and help the country rebuild itself? Is that in your mind?
Yes. For the first time, I'm getting emotional now, but for the first time in a while, I can see that within my future. I've wasted 23 years of my life in the UK in exile because I couldn't live there.
And I can tell by your voice that means an awful lot to you, to think that there is now at least a possibility of being able to return at some point. But of course, none of us know what will happen over the next year or two and whether there can be proper democracy restored to Venezuela, whether the economic lot of the Venezuelan people can be improved by a better, albeit temporary administration. Are you optimistic about that?
I am very optimistic. I know that Maduro is now in jail because the actions of all the people that have been locked up, that have spoken. There is a lot of evidence. The drug trafficking, although a minor topic when it comes to quantity, is a large operation that even involves the Spanish government. And there are other governments in the region, like Colombia, like Cuba, even Hezbollah, Iran. Everybody's saying now Trump only wants the oil. Well, I don't think Iran wanted to learn how to cook Venezuelan food. They also wanted uranium. Turkey wanted gold. China wanted oil. So I am fully aware that the Trump situation is also transactional, but at least it's transactional to our benefit for the first time in 23 years.
Well, because if the oil was sold to America or anywhere else, if the other natural resources were sold, that will be to the benefit of the Venezuelan people in a way that it hasn't been over the last 20 or so years.
Correct. So we did try. I always say that I will take many sins to my grave, but I will not take the sin of voting for the left. I never voted for Hugo Chavez, and at least I will die in peace that I was never complicit.
Well, I hope you can live out your dream, Hermes, and return at a time of your choosing to a successful Venezuela. Thank you very much indeed for phoning the programme today. See, there's the voice of the true Venezuelan, in my view. I mean, as I say, I haven't heard a single Venezuelan say that they don't support what Trump has done. He hasn't, and he's Venezuelan himself. That doesn't mean to say there aren't voices out there, but I wonder what voices there are, apart from maybe Jeremy Corbyn. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to convene our cross-question panel for the first Monday in the new year. We have with us the Labour MP for Halesowen, Alex Ballinger. He is a member of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. George Freeman returns. He's the Conservative MP for Mid-Norfolk. John Nicolson, journalist, broadcaster, former SNP MP and indeed former LBC presenter. And Cindy Yu, contributing editor of The Times. We do want questions on Venezuela, but there's so much else going on at the moment, particularly in Iran. We'd love your questions on that, or indeed any other domestic issue. The government has announced that it wants to help hospitality in the UK and small business. About time, some would say, because all they've done so far is penalise them. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Foreign Secretary says she's urged the US to uphold the rules-based order after it went into Venezuela and seized its president.
That means upholding international law and defending democracy. And it means confronting the complex, evolving and hybrid threats that we and our allies face in the world today.
Yvette Cooper was speaking in the Commons after Nicolas Maduro pleaded not guilty to drugs and weapons charges. He told a court in New York that he remains president of Venezuela. It was his first public appearance since being taken from his home on Saturday. American officials claim Mr. Maduro rejected de-escalation, but China and Russia say his capture was illegal. Emily Thornberry, chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, agrees.
We should be calling it out for what it is, a breach of international law. It is not for the country that is breaking the law to say whether or not it has broken the law. It is for the West, surely, to stand up and say, call it as it is.
Greenland's Prime Minister has said in the last hour the territory is hoping to improve relations with the United States. Jens Frederik Nielsen says it can't be compared to Venezuela. Donald Trump has said America needs Greenland. It's part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Danish journalist Morten Rønnelund.
Well, our Prime Minister says if we need to show up with military to repel American troops, then everything ends. That's her words. So no one isn't expecting that. Everybody's expecting some sort of negotiation about something. We don't precisely know what it is Donald Trump wants.
In other news, the Duke of Marlborough has indicated not guilty pleas to strangling his estranged wife. Charles James Spencer Churchill faces 3 charges. A man has been fined £500 after admitting to dressing as an admiral at a Remembrance Sunday event without permission. 65-year-old Jonathan Carley from Gwynedd in North Wales wore the uniform in Llandudno in November last year. And around 2,500 jobs could be at risk across the UK after 2 high street chains were put into administration. The owner of Claire's and the original factory shop says last-ditch measures have fallen through. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed above 10,000 for the first time in history, up 53 points at 10,004. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.15. LBC weather, snow showers clearing the east of England and easing further west. Very cold with a widespread frost and icy stretches. Cloudier in the north as a band of snow moves in tonight. Lows of -12 to -3 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and a very warm welcome to the first cross question of 2026. With me on the panel are, to my immediate left, John Nicolson, journalist, broadcaster and former SNP MP. Next to him, Alex Ballinger, Labour MP for Halesowen. He's a member of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee. To my right, Cindy Yu, contributing editor at The Times. And to her right, George Freeman, Conservative MP for Mid-Norfolk. They're here to answer your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can call or you can WhatsApp your question on that number or text 84850. And you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, the LBC YouTube channel and TikTok, believe it or not. We're so down with the kids on this programme. So get your questions in right now on 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Let's start off. The first question of the new year is from Andrew in Bromley. Hello, Andrew.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
So the question, when it comes to dealing with autocratic regimes, why can we not just apply double standards on these occasions and say, well done, Mr. President? Because otherwise you cannot deal with such countries in a democratic way.
Interesting question. George Freeman.
Well, it's an interesting question, Andrew. I think the truth, I've just come hot from the chamber listening to the Foreign Secretary try and answer 300 similar questions. For a country that believes in the rules-based system of international liberal democracy, how can we possibly sanction this? And I think the truth is the world order as we have known it is changing very fast. I'm not sure I've ever known the world in such a dangerous place. And this last year, we saw extraordinary developments with Trump in the White House and the publication at the end of the year of the new American security strategy, which is basically we're no longer the world's policeman. We do homeland security. By the way, our allies are now going to have to pay for what we used to do. And our key pillars are technology dominance and the supply chains that go with it. And this is a very different America, and we've relied on them to be the enforcer of the rules-based system. And I think the West, NATO, Europe, we are all trying to work out where is our security in a world in which the old order no longer applies. And it's not clear that we have an answer. And it wasn't clear today in the House that anyone in the House has an answer. No one really wants to be rude to America because they are our number one ally. They still underpin our security. And from a trading point of view, we rely on them. I think Britain is, we're in a very, very muddled situation, and our compass is spinning. I think that's the truth. And this is yet to play out. I fear today will send a very strong signal around the world to China and Taiwan and Russia or elsewhere in Eastern Europe that he who has the biggest stick can get away with it. And
wasn't it always thus, though?
Yeah, I think to some extent it has always been thus. But, perhaps we're just witnessing the end of a post-war period in which the institutions we put together after the war felt like they were keeping us safe. But it doesn't feel like there's much of a rules-based system at the moment. And the hand-wringing in Parliament this evening is tragic, heartfelt, but tragic. Is the world now really run by a few people with big sticks? And the answer feels like yes at the moment.
For Labour, Alex Ballinger.
Well, I'm not going to disagree massively with George. We've seen the ending of a brutal authoritarian leader in Venezuela, but I don't think anyone would say the way that was handled was legal by international standards. And it is incredibly disappointing that we're not able to do anything about that. It's making us all a bit less safe. But I think any normal person...
Well, Venezuelans would argue the contrary. They would think it's making them much safer. I've yet to hear on any media channel any Venezuelan say this is not a good thing.
Well, we've replaced Maduro, of course, with Maduro's deputy. So we still have an autocratic regime in place. The 80 or so people that have been killed during the process, I'm not sure those families would be happy with the way that it's handled. And it's as George says, it's more about the signals that this sends to other countries around the world. And I don't actually think it's going to really affect the way that Russia is thinking. So Russia has already invaded a democratically elected state in Ukraine. It's done that twice. They had no compunction about the international rules-based order when they did that. What it does do, I think, is it damages the credibility of the West and America in the global South. Now, we've already had a lot of problems with that in the Middle East, with the way that Israel has not been able to be challenged for the breaches of international humanitarian law. We've now, I think, going to have big problems in South America for the same reason. And it's another nail in the coffin of that credibility that we have for standing up for those rules. And it's going to make it more difficult for us to do everything that we want to achieve as it becomes to enforcing sanctions against our enemies like the Russians. Why should people enforce sanctions if they see the Americans do the same sort of thing? So it does become very difficult for us in this situation.
Sam in Cambridge has got a follow-up question. He says, does Keir Starmer's reaction to the Venezuela attack make him look weak? Well, he's sat firmly on the fence, hasn't he?
I don't think he can do anything else. And I think people in the UK would want our Prime Minister to stand up for the UK's national interest. And in this situation, George is right, it's muddled. We do want to stand up for the international rules-based order, but we do also need the support and help of our strongest security ally in the world, which is America. And as we are fighting for what people in Eastern Europe will say is an existential battle against the Russians, we do need to keep the Americans on side. And that personal relationship that the Prime Minister has with Donald Trump, with his coalition of the willing, with bringing together other European allies, is vital.
Then you should come out and say, look, and there is an argument to be had here. He could say, I support what President Trump has done here. He's freed the Venezuelan people from a tyrannical regime. He's stopping the narco trade between Venezuela and American gangsters. It's completely legal under international law because they're a threat to the United States. So there may be a legal argument to be had there, but I support the president. Or he could do what Ed Davey has suggested he do and do exactly the opposite. But sitting on the fence for the sixth most powerful nation in the world is risible, isn't it?
I think it's realistic. And I think it is practical in the situation that we're in. And I think if either of those two options were taken, the Prime Minister would be doing the wrong thing because it's not legal. Any objective observer can see that. And if we take a really strong position against President Trump, people in my constituency, lots of people work for JLR. So that trade deal that we have with the Americans, that might be under threat. Those people in Eastern Europe that I was talking about, the Polish, the Estonians, others that are worried about the Russian invasion, they will be more in threat. So he has to walk and tread this really delicate line. And not everyone is going to be happy. Lots of your callers won't be happy, but I think he's doing the right thing in the circumstances.
John Nicolson.
Well, it's not legal, is it? We know what the international law is. You're allowed to. Yep, you're allowed. It's Chapter 7, and you're allowed
of what?
Of the UN Charter. You're allowed to intervene for two particular sets of circumstances. One, if you yourself are attacked, and the other one is if you're going in because a group of people are in imminent danger. And of course, that was the argument that was used in Yugoslavia or Serbia to protect the people of the Bosnian Muslims.
But Trump could quite reasonably say, well, we are being attacked by the Venezuelan drugs trade.
Well, Trump can say anything whatsoever, can't he?
No, but you can imagine that being a legal argument, can't you?
But it's not, because that would allow him to intervene anywhere at all. And it's the gross hypocrisy, of course, which is risible, because he's just pardoned the ex-Honduras leader who was serving a 45-year sentence in the United States after a months-long trial for trafficking drugs. He ran the cocaine superhighway that went from South America to the United States. Trump has let him off, and dozens of other people already convicted for drugs charges in the United States. So it's the hypocrisy. I mean, it almost makes you look back with affection to the good old days when you had to invent a dodgy dossier before you invaded a country, when Colin Powell had to humiliate himself before the United Nations and make a pretense of legality for invading a country. But of course, Trump doesn't care about any of that. And as your other panelists have said so far, what does this mean going forward? It used to be called the Monroe Doctrine, didn't it, where there were spheres of influence. South America for the Americans, the whole of the Far East for the Chinese, and of course Europe for the Russians. If I was sitting in Tallinn, for example, tonight, I would be very worried about an emboldened Vladimir Putin looking at Estonia. If I was any one of China's neighbours, I would be worried as well. And it does also, of course, have a knock-on effect on the negotiations over the future of Ukraine. Who could now possibly say that they think that President Trump is an honest broker when it comes to dealing with Putin? Well, some Americans have tried to argue that. And of course, Keir Starmer goes through the motions of pretending that he thinks he's to be believed.
OK. Cindy, you.
Well, to answer Sam's question about whether or not Keir Starmer looks weak, I think he probably does, but that's because the UK in this new world that everyone else has outlined is weak. frankly. What we're realizing is that hard power is the only currency that matters, or at least it's the currency that matters the most. And actually the UK and most of Europe and other middle Western powers don't have enough hard power. Like we've free-ridden on the American nuclear umbrella since the war. Economically, it's been great, fine, but now domestic economies are not doing so well. And it's actually countries like the US, like China. I wouldn't even count Russia in there. It's really just the US and China that are calling the shots in the world these days. And actually, to John's point about the hypocrisy, I actually find it quite refreshing that Trump has done away with the pretense of a rules-based international order. I've never liked that phrase because I actually think that for people in the West, we have benefited from that. But actually, if you go to many other places in the world, they never thought that there were any fair rules anyway, even after the Cold War, even before the Cold War had ended. And so, going into Iraq with a dodgy dossier, is that really better than what Trump has done? I mean, all the way through, I think this rules-based international order has been a bit of a sham, has been a bit of a pretense. Whether or not it gives countries like China more permission, I don't personally think so, because I think they've always seen through the sham. They've never believed in it either. And so I think all of us are basically now clear, I guess with the middle powers in Europe are now clear as well, that that was a nice illusion.
So you don't buy into the conspiracy theory that Trump squared off Putin and President Xi before doing what he did in Venezuela and say, this is our sphere of influence. You do what you have to.
If Xi knew what was happening on Friday, he would not have sent that diplomatic envoy, that delegation on Friday. They were amongst the last people to see Maduro as a free man on Friday afternoon. They were probably still in Caracas when Delta Force went in. That is way too risky and way too reckless for the Chinese to be doing. So I think the Chinese were definitely caught out. And from the Russian reaction, it also seems like they were caught out. I don't know. I mean, conspiracy theories require a higher threshold of proof, I think.
Well, I think that is true.
It also makes you presumably think if you're the president of a country and feel vulnerable, you're going to take a different approach to how you arm yourself.
Colombia tonight, I would feel very vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yep. And if you were even thinking about whether or not it would be a good idea to have a nuclear weapon, for instance, you would look at this, wouldn't you? And you'd think the countries that are going to keep themselves safe and the regime safe are the ones that arm themselves up to the teeth and present a real threat to the United States. And the countries that are tin pot dictators in South America are not, but, North Korea, for example, countries that have decided to go down that route, they're going to feel that they took the right decision.
Well, of course, Trump said in response to the Iranian protests, we're locked and loaded. And I think if I was part of the Iranian regime, I might be taking that comment a little bit more seriously now than I maybe did at the time. Right, we'll come to more of your questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Ask a Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC. On the panel with me, Alex Ballinger, Labour MP. Have I pronounced your name right?
You have, yes, thank you.
Thank God for that. Labour MP for Halesowen, which is in the West Midlands.
You also pronounced Halesowen correctly, so thank you.
Oh, God, I'm on a roll. Now, you're a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Presumably you're going to start looking at this. I mean, Emily Thornberry has been quite outspoken on that today, hasn't she? What's she like? She's a good friend of this programme, so be careful what you say. What's she like as a chair?
So I love Emily. She's a great, fun member of Parliament, so she is a perfect chair for a committee that has to look at really difficult and complicated subjects. And she speaks her mind, and she speaks the truth. So she's been in Parliament for
Which is unusual for many Labour MPs nowadays.
I think it's the right
obviously.
skill for a chair of a select committee.
John Nicolson, what select committee, did you chair one?
No, I didn't.
You should have done.
Yeah, thank you. You're kind. Many people said that. No, no. My mum said that. I was on the culture committee for best part of a decade, and under a whole succession of Conservative chairs.
Cindy Yu is not on a select committee, mainly because she's not a member of Parliament, but I'm sure you'd be a brilliant member of one. And George Freeman, you must be on a select committee.
I am. They were kind enough to let me deputy chair of the Science and Technology Select Committee.
Deputy chair of a select committee?
It means I stand in for our excellent chair, Chion Wuro, when she's otherwise detained.
Well, I'm sure it's a glorious experience.
Having been a minister for science and technology a number of times, it is actually, I think it's a strength of our parliamentary system that you then get a chance to flip, poach a gamekeeper. And it's been great fun, actually, watching new ministers do the job that I used to do. And in the end, I want them to do well. But asking the right question in a way that helps is, you can be quite constructive.
You were renowned for that, asking questions which helped Nadine Dorries, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, as you know, I'm a journalist by training, and the problem with lots of the select committees is that MPs can be incredibly verbose. And by the time they finish their 12 parenthetical clauses, the person who's on the other side of the table has the chance to think of an answer.
Self-knowledge is a wonderful thing.
But I think it's important to read the brief, to be brief, to do extra briefing, and to be short and snappy with the questions, and to recognise as well that not everybody who appears before you is somebody that you want to give a hard time to. Sometimes you have to bring people out gently. Sometimes you have to prosecute rascals who are trying to be evasive. But it's a good opportunity for MPs to work cross-party to improve legislation, I think.
Let's go to Jerry in Whitley Bay. Jerry, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. If the USA takes over Greenland, either by military force or by just basically occupation, should the UK cut diplomatic relations with the USA?
Well, there's a nice easy one for you, Alex, on your first programme.
Thank you very much, Ian, for picking me first. Firstly, Denmark is a NATO ally, an ally both of the UK and of America. And whilst Trump does talk about the threat to Greenland, that the Russian spy ships, the Chinese devices and other things actually being real, and I think everyone accepts that, Denmark is a solid security partner of the United States and is very capable of working with the US and us and others to defend Greenland and to counter any of those threats in the appropriate way. So I think it's entirely misplaced for the Americans to think that they need to take Greenland. I think it's exceptionally unhelpful for them to continue to say that and to make these sort of threats. And I think the Prime Minister has been completely right to stand by Denmark and stand by Greenland in stating that it's up to the Danish and to the Greenlanders for the future of
but not the Venezuelans.
Well, Venezuela, of course, was not a democratically elected European country that is our ally. Now, I don't support the actions. I think I've made that clear in this panel show. But it is a very different situation than Greenland, of course.
Cindy.
Well, I think it's such a nightmare situation for policymakers in Europe, and you've seen that in the last weekend, where the Danish Prime Minister, as well as the Greenlandish Prime Minister and other European figures have come out and say, don't even think about it, because that's all they can do right now is to hope that Trump doesn't even force the question. I mean, to answer Jerry's question, I mean, it depends on when it happens, if it happens, and depends on how it happens, I think. It's hard to imagine a military takeover of Greenland at the hands of America. You know, I think that would really tear NATO apart, and that would be maybe...
Well, it would be the end of NATO, wouldn't it?
Well, you say that. I mean, what is NATO without America as well, though? You know,
it might actually shake European countries, including this one, into the realisation that we are really in a different world now and that they're going to have to fund their own defence.
It might do. And how quickly can they get that stuff together? You know, it's a massive question. You know, obviously the motivation is here. I think everyone around this panel can agree that right now we are thinking Europe needs to be arming itself to the teeth much more. But how quickly can you do that? And what are the trade-offs you have to do that domestically in order to achieve that? Everyone is hoping they don't have to make those decisions. But if America forces question, it will be a hell scenario. At the same time, I can imagine some kind of deal being done, to use Trump's favourite word, where it doesn't quite seem like such subjection to American power. For example, allowing America more nuclear placements in Greenland, more security guarantees, whatever it is, budget, defence spending increases and guarantees such as that. You know, could that appease Trump, basically? And that, I think, would not require something like cutting diplomatic relations with the US. But frankly speaking, I don't think that Europe and the UK are deciding factors in this current scenario.
But if the Greenlanders should be building their own bunkers at the moment, what about the Taiwanese? Because, I mean, I've got friends in Taiwan, and they whenever I sort of say, a bit worried about these exercises that the Chinese are doing, oh, no, they're not going to do that. They've done this every year. They are completely complacent.
Totally complacent. I mean, the air drills kind of fade into the background for them because it happens so often.
Yeah.
Except one day it won't be fake anymore. But, that's the thing, right? I mean...
Do you think that's an inevitability?
No, I don't think it's inevitable at all. Actually, I think there's a lot of ifs in Chinese and cross-strait relations. There's a lot of ifs. I don't see it, certainly by 2027, which is the deadline that a lot of people talk about. But, the Taiwanese case... in this grander occasion of what's happening this weekend, I don't think it changes their odds that much, because I don't think it gives China permission that China doesn't feel already that it had. It was never international law that was keeping China back. It was the lack of hard power to take Taiwan that was keeping China back. On the other hand, this idea that because China doesn't have Venezuelan oil anymore, they can't levy an invasion is also ludicrous. Venezuela is only about 4% of China's oil imports, and oil is only a minority of China's energy supply. So basically, I think for Taiwan, the situation hasn't changed either way too much. But what it does do is for China to go out to the rest of the world and say, we have the moral authority now because look at what America's doing as well.
Let's go back to the question from Jerry. If the USA takes over Greenland, should the UK cut diplomatic relations with America? John Nicolson.
Well, I'm glad we're all agreed that it's not a good thing for Trump to invade a NATO ally, because I watched a woeful interview with a Labour Home Office minister earlier on today where he wouldn't answer that question on Sky News. He just went into full robot mode.
But do you blame him for that? Because I'll tell you who I blame. I blame the Downing Street briefing operation, because if they, presumably they must have known that Keir Starmer was going to take a trenchant position on Greenland later in the day, why send out a junior minister basically to be slayed by the media?
We're all responsible for our own actions, and really you've got to take some ownership. If you're so wet that you can't answer a question like that and you end up looking ridiculous in your inability to answer, and if you can't do the job, resign and do something else, I would say.
I think that's the first time anyone has called Mike Tapp wet, by the way. probably
that is true.
How about we look at Oliver? Sophie Rhodes has tweeted it. It's embarrassing. Of course, we're not going to cut off diplomatic relations, obviously, with the United States, but you have to pinch yourself. Here are two NATO allies going head-to-head, the Danes behaving in a calm, responsible way, trying to defend their position, trying not to sound irate, but sounding calm, and Trump saying something absolutely extraordinary. As you say, it would presumably be the end of NATO. But it also reminds us how isolated we are here in the United Kingdom post-Brexit, doesn't it, really? Because our future has to be in Europe. It has to be, as you rightly say, Iain, defending ourselves here in Europe. We have to spend more protecting ourselves. I think we have to spend more in defence because we face real threats from Putin. And goodness knows now we're talking about facing a threat from the United States. I just hope he's so preoccupied with dealing with his special military operation that he's running in Venezuela.
I get the illusion.
Thank you, I knew you would. that will perhaps distract him for long enough, and it will be a complicated thing for him to deal with as well. Do you think the election is approaching, and of course the midterms are coming up?
Do you think now would be the time for the SNP to reevaluate their anti-nuclear policies?
Well, I'm not pro-nuclear myself, but I'm strongly pro
in the
NATO.
current circumstances that we find ourselves.
No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody thinks that Scotland can really have a credible, independent nuclear defence any more than the UK has. We know that within NATO there are countries which have nuclear weapons. I don't want to see proliferation of nuclear armament within Europe itself, with countries like Denmark and Finland and Sweden all looking to arm themselves with nuclear weapons. I don't think that's the way forward. But I think NATO is the way forward for Scotland. And I know that was controversial within the SNP, but fortunately has now been resolved.
George Freeman.
Well, I think to go back to the question, should we cut off diplomatic relations? No. But I think it would be, if Trump decides that he wants to occupy Greenland, it would be a massive next step in the unwinding of this post-war NATO settlement that we've all come to live with as a sort of security blanket. I think Cindy's right. The right response is when you're dealing with a strong man, he likes a deal. And I think we need to reinvent British statecraft and think a bit more about what's the deal. So, for example, in Ukraine, I think we should be, instead of announcing that in 4 or 5 years we'll have the arms to help the Ukrainians, we should be buying American arms with European money now and giving them to the Ukrainians. All the military people I talk to tell me with the right weapons they could knock the Russians over in the next 18 months.
That's what we're doing now, George, isn't it? Because
very slowly Europe is discussing spending more money on defence while Russia basically wins. But so I think the deal is the key. And I think this speaks to a bigger truth, really, which is that as this dream, this post-war liberal order that we all come to think we could rely on, unfolds at the hands of big bloc China, big bloc America, Russia, we, the UK, I think, has a big role to try and help. One foot in Europe as a good European neighbour, citizen with shared security, one foot out. And economically, I've been making the case we should be doing a lot more with Japan, with Switzerland, with Norway, with Canada, with Australia, with New Zealand. There are plenty of countries out there that don't want to be part of the Beijing, Brussels or Washington bloc. But I think in Whitehall, as well as in Downing Street, successively, I'm not talking about a particular political party, our compass is spinning. We've forgotten the art of statecraft. We've been so locked into the European Union for 40 years that everything... It's been very difficult for our political establishment to work out that we've now got to duck and dive. We've got to do deals in Europe and outside and work out how to deal with Trump. Well,
if you want a ducker and a diver in charge, maybe Nigel Farage is your man.
He's certainly a ducker and a diver. I did think for a while...
That was ducker, by the way, John. Yeah.
It would have been... it would have been quite amusing for Keir Starmer to appoint Farage to Washington last year and say, come on then, you say he's your best mate, now show us and put Britain before the interests of reform.
It's also interesting that, of course, Nigel Farage has said in his statement on Saturday, this is a breach of international law, which Keir Starmer hasn't been able to admit, has he, Alex?
So we're talking about deal makers. Now, I think many people cannot accuse Keir Starmer of not being a good deal maker. So we have the best trade deal.
Chagos.
That's international law, which we're also talking about respecting. But we have the best trade deal with America out of almost every other country because of his relationship with Donald Trump, because of the effort our team in Washington is making, and the team that we've worked over many months to achieve. A good trade deal with the EU, a trade deal with India, a trade deal with South Korea. So those things are already happening. What I'm worried about now is that the American move away from the rules-based order that we've all been talking about, and whether or not they'll return after Trump is replaced in 3 years' time or not. We need to be much closer to the Europeans. We're already building up our security relationship with Europe after it being dashed, I think, through part of Brexit. Ukraine has made that essential. This is another reason for us to rebuild that security relationship. We need to rebuild our economic relationship, and we need to look at working more closely with those countries.
We actually led Europe over Ukraine. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. We did.
So we didn't actually have to be within the EU to do that. I mean, we've always been, in European terms, it's always been us and the French. Now, the Germans now seem to have pretensions of joining us. But anyway, listen, we've got to go to the news headlines. It's 8:33. And let's get those headlines from Matt Hewitt.
Venezuela's captured president has denied drugs and weapons charges in a US court during his first public appearance since being taken from his home early on Saturday. Lawyers representing Nicolás Maduro have questioned the legality of what they called his military abduction. Here, the Foreign Secretaries urged Donald Trump's administration to uphold international law and diplomacy after his threats to take control of Greenland, the islands run by Denmark. Its Prime Minister has warned US military intervention would spell the end of the NATO alliance. And Sir Keir Starmer has told LBC he's looking at further support for firms hit by higher business rates. A revaluation means many, including pubs, bars and restaurants, are facing much higher bills from April. LBC weather. Snow showers clearing the east of England and easing further west. Very cold with a widespread frost and icy stretches. Cloudier in the north as a band of snow moves in. Lows of -12 to -3 Celsius.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
They have fatal incompetence.
Straight to the point.
What is the problem they've got over there?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The country's going backwards. Growth down. Energy prices up.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:36 on LBC. Alex Ballinger, Labour MP, George Freeman, Conservative MP, John Nicolson, former SNP MP, and Cindy Yu, current contributing editor of The Times. It's like saying sort of my current husband or current wife, isn't it? Anyway.
Are you proposing to me, Iain?
No, because I would be a bigamist if I did that. Let's go to a text from Kathy in Lingfield, who says, is it time for action to be taken against the grok bit of Elon Musk's social media hellscape? Now it's being used to sexualise photos of women and even children without their consent. For the uninitiated, grok is sort of the equivalent of ChatGPT. It's an AI tool where you can ask it to make graphics or sort of write things. Now, Ofcom today, the media regulator, has demanded answers over the use of X's AI platform grok to alter photos of women and girls posted on the site, to remove their real clothes and replace them with very skimpy clothing, while the European Commission says this altering of people's photos is illegal. Cindy?
Well, I think we thought that day would come. Maybe people didn't think it would come so quickly with the advances in AI in the last few years. If you think only about 3 years ago that ChatGPT was launched, and now we have generative AI that looks incredibly realistic, and we have an Elon Musk AI tycoon who is very, very unscrupulous and a bit of a perv, to be honest, with the way that he's using...
Allegedly.
Yes, allegedly.
I'm not sure that covers it.
It's my opinion.
I was counting the seconds there before you came in.
Or be a professional broadcaster yourself.
Let me put it another way. His usage of AI has been pretty misogynistic and has been pretty sexualized. And Grok is just the latest scenario of this. But I think this problem is bigger than Elon Musk, because with the AI generative tools from even ChatGPT, there are some guidelines, but it will be possible one day to do really, really even more realistic deepfakes that are just infringing on people's privacy. And you've got these companies that are multinational companies that don't really answer to any one jurisdiction. So of course it's deeply immoral, but what I'm not sure we have the current tools to deal with that right now. And it just speaks to a wider issue of where generative AI goes in the coming years. I mean, it's going to be a massive
I've only
problem.
recently learned how to use AI, and I'm not very good at it, but I used it to create an LBC graphic over the weekend to say that Cross Question is now going to be 4 days a week. And I just said to it, use this existing LBC graphic, put these words in, make it look nice, and hey presto, it did it. And I was rather quite proud of myself for having done that. But there's nothing to stop anyone else from creating what looks like an official LBC graphic saying a particular presenter is guilty of this, that, or the other. And there's no regulation that can stop that happening, is there?
No, there's nothing at the moment. And of course, the creative industries in this country are locked in this argument with the government about how much leverage, how much leeway to give to these tech companies in terms of scraping the raw data from creative, from artists and musical actors or whoever it is, in order to train better AI. But that's just a matter of time. Better AI is coming. I guess for us as potential consumers of this AI is that we just need to be better at telling what is real and what's fake. If you spend as much time as I do scrolling on Instagram, which I would not recommend, there are these videos out there that tell you this bit is a fake video, that bit's a real video. And I think at the moment it's all so new that we're quite gullible about it. So even if you can't prevent the AI from doing it, at least what would be good if we can at least tell when it is AI.
John, a lot of people watching this or listening to this now will have seen an AI-generated video from the Kruger Gazette, who make these satirical videos of politicians. And they did a brilliant one of my interview with Kemi Badenoch, making me look like a sort of monster. And
this was AI.
Yeah. And thank you. And Bonnie Blue walking into the studio and Kemi Badenoch whacking her with a fish. And there were genuinely people who thought that was real.
Not the brightest people, presumably, who
I'm not casting any aspersions on our listeners.
Wasn't. I don't have the highest expectations of Kemi, but that seems unlikely. The other day I reposted something that a friend wrote to me and said, "You do realise this was AI?" I mean, it was quite innocent, actually. It was something to do with buildings, which I'm interested in. But they said this has been created, and it was so good I didn't know. I just took my friend's word for it, and I deleted it. I'm no expert in this. I sat in the select committee when we were looking at the online safety bill, which is the overall issue of how we keep people safe and protected from disinformation online. The one bit of the question that I noticed will probably have Elon Musk rolling around laughing is the fact that Ofcom has been in touch with him. Ofcom must be one of the weakest regulators in the world. Ofcom is a truly pitiful,
it's a fabulous organisation, I think.
Organisation, and he's not going to rush to reply to them. They're not going to enforce anything. The chair of Ofcom, Lord Grade, said at his selection interview that he didn't use social media. How can he possibly be expected to understand any of this? And he was appointed anyway because the government always gets their man.
Now, George Freeman, you have been a victim of this fakery, haven't you? You haven't had your clothes removed or changed, but it was quite an experience, I imagine.
It was quite an experience. My phone went very hot one day in the autumn, and lots of foul abuse and people saying, I never thought I couldn't work out what. And then I saw a video of me announcing I was joining Reform. And anyone who knows me, and you know me, that's very unlikely. But it was very compelling. It looked like me. It was
if it means the Liberal Democrats, that was sort of more believable, wouldn't it be?
Maybe to you, yeah. Not to my constituents, perhaps. But anyway, there I was in my scruffy tank top, in my office, waving my hands around, speaking like me, looking like me. And I thought, what on earth's going on? I didn't say those words. I wouldn't even say them if I was drunk. And then I realised it's not been dubbed. And it took about 30 seconds, and I realised, this is the AI deepfake stuff we've heard about. And it took about 3 days to deal with the firefight and reassure everyone.
And it was during the Tory conference, wasn't it? Or just before?
Just after. Yeah. What was interesting was I got in touch with Meta immediately. And I think, this is a really interesting topic. We've come from the lawlessness of geopolitics, where seemingly the old order no longer applies, to the lawlessness of the dark web and the light web. And I asked Meta, in the end, who's responsible? You're a responsible broadcaster, Iain. You just said allegedly. You know the rules, and LBC do it well. And so Meta is a publisher. So I contacted Meta and said, presumably you're going to take this down. I mean, presumably there's some sanction. And they said, no, it doesn't breach any of our guidance. Now, I get that grooming, terrorism, serious and organised crime is more serious than what happened to me. But in a democracy, it is pretty serious.
So is it still there?
Yeah. Meta refused to take it down. The police took it seriously and said, we really do think this is quite serious because actually we're seeing a lot of economic fraud, we're seeing a lot of people masquerading as salespeople and all the rest of it. I think in the end, this comes down to a question of identity. When I was the AI minister, and I had this proposal for text and data mining. After the House of Commons Culture Committee contacted me, and I realised what a furore there was, I blocked it and said, hang on, the burden of proof should be on the AI industry to prove that they're not going to steal the identity of artists and creatives as they train their systems. We have to surely, as a country, be able to be an AI powerhouse and have a creative industry. And I lost my job not long afterwards. That'll tell you how powerful the AI industry is in successive governments.
But if you look on YouTube, there are loads of videos now with brand new ABBA songs which have not been created by Benny Anderson.
The most viewed videos on YouTube at the moment are AI generated.
Yeah.
So I think this is about identity, really, and about we have to somehow, as legislators, think about where we draw the lines. But publishers, Meta, I think, do have a responsibility. And
but they're so disdainful, though. That's the thing. When they're called by politicians to account, they are disdainful. They laugh at the politicians. They don't really think that they're going to be held to account. You can actually point to the actual rules that they're breaching in their own guidelines, and they'll completely ignore you. I suspect the only way that we really deal with them is substantive fines, because that's worked in Germany, and I think it should work here.
Fines for the directors of the companies.
Yes.
So as I understand it, we are outlawing this type of activity. So under the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy that was announced last month, nudification, so AI tools being used to do this awful thing to women and girls are going to be outlawed. So that's important. I also think that we can learn lessons, as you say, from the Europeans and from the Brazilians. So Brazil, after Twitter at the time refused to comply with a High Court order, shut down Twitter. They turned it off entirely. Elon Musk kicked off a big fuss. But ultimately, a few months later, he complied with the High Court order, gave the information that he had to give, and now Twitter is active again, or X is active again in Brazil. The French, they had a dispute with the owner of Telegram, who was refusing to share information about child abuse images. They arrested him after he didn't comply. And we need to be ready, I think, to take these more serious actions.
So we need to play hardball.
So Ofcom needs to have more powers, needs to be playing more hardball with these type of media companies.
I'm not sure I want to live in a country where the government can shut off, apps, social media apps, though. I feel like that is a pretty drastic move to say that should be within our maybe it should be within our tool set, but it's a pretty unsavory tool.
I'm quite sympathetic to that. What about living in a country where if your identity is stolen from you, you have an automatic right to a major economic reward? And the burden of proof is on the person who is accused to prove that they didn't. Because I agree with John. I think there's an issue here about the balance. At the moment, the vast majority of us have no power. And we're relying on Ofcom, whose power is questionable, against these huge tech companies.
Well, and also, you presumably could contact Meta in a reasonably quick period of time. Most people listening to or watching this programme wouldn't have the faintest idea how to do that.
Yeah, powerless.
Sure,
so I think if the law said, if your identity is stolen, and that could be as everyone wants politicians to have the mick taken out of us. I don't want to live in a humorless politics, but being blatantly and seriously misrepresented. If you're a woman and you're defrocked, if you're Iain Dale and you're ripped off and someone pretends to be you, whatever it might be, the law should be on the side of that person who has been wronged, with a very quick, big fine to the people responsible. And I think we'd find that they quite quickly start to sharpen up.
Yep.
Right, I will spend the next 90 seconds informing our panel what the fun question for the end of the show is, so they can prepare their hilarious answers.
No pressure.
It's 8:48.
This is LBC.
If you
Last question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
10 to 9 on LBC. Alex Ballinger, John Nicolson, Cindy Yu and George Freeman answering your questions. Here's a WhatsApp question from Jim in Lincoln. With the rise in unemployment every month since coming to office, despite the government saying more people are in work than at the time of the election, well, both things can be true. It also is raising taxes yet again, saying everyone is better off and removing liberties like jury trials and bringing in ID, but saying they believe in less government intrusion. Is this the most gaslighting government Britain has ever had? Labour MP Alex Ballinger.
No.
Nice balanced question, though, don't you think?
Your listeners may be unsurprised to hear me say that we inherited a bit of a difficult situation.
Unemployment was falling when you came to power, wasn't it?
So we had the highest amount of public debt that we've had in our history, close to 100%.
Unemployment
we're
talking about here.
Employment has risen since the election.
Unemployment has risen. Would you accept that?
Unemployment has also risen since the election. I agree with that. But some of the changes that we've made, Pat McFadden, as the Work and Pensions Minister, has made, is about reducing economic inactivity. So part of that rise in unemployment is people that weren't looking for work coming back into the workplace, particularly after the COVID pandemic. So there are lots of people that decided not to work through the pandemic, and through them getting better, through the actions of the government, through our Get Back to Work programme that we've been encouraging people to do, they are now looking to work again. So I'm not going to say all of it, but part of that increase in unemployment is those people trying to get back to work, which is a positive thing. And that's why also you'll see the number of people in employment also increasing. So I don't think we're gaslighting, as your questioner says. I think these things are really complicated, and we have inherited a difficult situation. And we've spent the last 18 months or so making the legislation, because it does take about 18 months to get stuff through the House of Commons and the House of Lords, to put us in a better place, to improve the economy. Our new workers' rights bill is just going to be made into law in the spring.
That's going to help.
That's going to help unemployment.
That's going to help workers. That's going to help people that don't want to have those 0-hour contracts.
Do you accept that if you put more regulation on business, that inevitably is going to result in less economic activity? It will inevitably result in people losing their jobs.
I think good employers are already doing the things that we're putting in our employment rights bill. And those people that aren't good employers will recognise the productivity gains that are found when you have happy, hard-working employees that are treated responsibly. And that is all our employment rights bill is trying to do. As I say, the economy grew last year more than anyone predicted in 2024. So we are doing better despite the difficult inheritance that we had. People can say that's gaslighting, but it's the truth. Employment is up. Unemployment is also up. It's a complicated picture. But the things that people notice, the cost of living, inflation, their mortgage prices, these things are all moving in the right direction. And I think 2026 is going to be the year where people are going to see actually all of the decisions the Labour government has taken are starting to make my life better.
But Shabana Mahmood is making David Blunkett look like a liberal in her job as Home Secretary, and combined with David Lammy effectively abolishing jury trials, introducing more CCTV. I mean, this could be described as a government that is more right-wing than in the Home Office and Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, and that's quite an achievement. And that's why I think Jim is saying you're gaslighting, because you're talking about increasing people's liberties, but actually introducing fairly draconian measures.
I don't think Shabana Mahmood is saying anything other than tough talk on migration, tough talk on crime, and that's exactly, I think, what the British public want the government to do. So I think there's no obfuscation here. This is the government recognising a problem. The problem is illegal migration. The problem is crime, although crime is reducing, and it's taking tough action on those issues to respond to an issue that's really important to the public.
John?
Labour is running to the right in order to try and answer the challenge from Farage. But what they don't seem to be noticing is they're hemorrhaging votes on the left. So they're losing to the Greens in England, they're losing to Plaid in Wales, they're losing to SNP in Scotland. They don't seem to understand where the danger is. Now, the problem that Labour has is no matter how much they shout about their illiberal policies, nobody really thinks that Keir Starmer is Nigel Farage in disguise. He comes across as inauthentic because he is inauthentic. Gaslighting doesn't work with the public, I don't think. We see it with Trump. Trump's trying to distract his voter base from his disastrous economy, and his popularity is dire, and Labour is heading for a thumping at next year's elections. Whatever they're doing, it's not working.
In Scotland, they're polling 10%, which, given that they were, I think, almost outpolling SNP about a year, 18 months ago, is quite something.
It is, and it's extraordinary. The SNP has been in power for this length of time and is heading for possibly a majority.
19 years.
Yes, possibly a majority, certainly a majority with the Greens. What's happening in Scotland is that Labour and the Tories are losing votes, especially older, Europhobic voters, unionist voters are migrating to Nigel Farage. So we could see the extraordinary position in Scotland where you have an SNP government and you have Reform in opposition, and the demographics are quite interesting because it's younger, more progressive voters in Scotland who are voting SNP, and it's older, more conservative voters, either ex-Labour or ex-Tory, who are going to be voting Reform.
Okay, George Freeman.
I think the answer to the question is yes. And gaslighting is a sophisticated term. What my constituents can see is just a growing gap between the rhetoric of the government of the day and the reality on the ground. And by the way, I'm not saying this all started with Labour. I think this has been coming over the last 10, 15 years. In my part of the world, what people see is unemployment rising fast, small businesses, which is most businesses. I think in the Treasury, there's a view that a business with fewer than 20 people is a tax dodge. I mean, in Norfolk, most businesses are 5 to 10, 15, 20 people, and they are taking on fewer people because of possibly well-intended legislation. It makes it harder to take people on, more expensive to take people on. Taxes are going up, so they take fewer people on. So unemployment is going up. Businesses are closing. Fragile rural communities with a very high cost of living are being hit very hard, disproportionately hard, weirdly. There seems to be some sort of Labour battle with the rural areas going on. So I think people can see one thing going on and they hear this talk of legislation and of shiny uplands of tomorrow. And there's a mismatch, a big mismatch. And I think the truth is that people know that in the end, in the economy, all the public sector money, all the public sector jobs have got to be paid for in the end by businesses that are profitable. And when you cross a line into a world in which it is very hard to run a profitable business, people stop doing it. And I quit last year when someone asked me economically what was the outlook. I said, I think the rich are going to leave, the middle class will pack up working 90 hours a week, and the poor will turn to crime. It was a quip, but
well, that was cheery.
I'm seeing that in my patch. You're seeing cash economy, a lot of black market economy, a big rise in basic crime, and a lot of people not working as hard. The middle class engine of growth is slowing down.
And a happy new year to you too,
Yeah, it's
George.
a very, very hard outlook. And I think what the public wants is truth. They want to be told some truth, that over the last 20 years we've built an economy dependent on immigrant labour, we've run structural deficits, we haven't been honest about it. They want truth. And if Nigel Farage is the only person who seems to be telling tough truths, I feel they'll vote for him. All of us, mainstream politicians, have got to be more honest with people about what's really going on.
Cindy?
I feel like Labour came in being honest, and they were accused of being too gloomy. You know, just over a year ago, everyone said, you need to give people more hope. You can't just have the doom and gloom message. And now we're saying they're not being gloomy enough. I mean, I just don't really understand. I think it's actually a really hard, kind of tightrope to walk to please the electorate at the moment, because I think voters are so impatient for change that actually I don't think Labour have been given that much of a chance.
OK, fun question from Kaz in Luton. It's been announced that a co-founder of the video game giant Sega has died. I loved my Mega Drive growing up and was brilliant at Sonic the Hedgehog. Which video game platform was your favourite, and what was your favourite game? Glad I don't have to answer this, never having played one apart from Pac-Man. Cindy?
I'm also late coming to video games because of a strict mum.
Which is to
as
her
an adult,
credit.
I've somehow been quite addicted. Zelda, Legend of Zelda, I would say. I think it's only available on Switch. It's just a Japanese company.
George?
I'm like you, Ian, in this respect. I checked out with Pac-Man in the 90s. I loathe video games.
Alex?
I love video games.
Oh, thank God for that.
When I was a child, my best friend had a Master System, and I used to go to his house and play Sonic the Hedgehog all the time. But my dad bought me an Amiga 500, which was like a precursor to a computer. And I had this fantastic game called Escape from Monkey Island, where you had to go around solving puzzles, speaking to people, and try to use your wit to try and escape from this crazy place. Exactly that. An excellent training for being in the House of Commons.
John?
Well, like most kids, my generation, I was too busy playing the harpsichord to have much time for video games, really. And if my parents allowed me a little bit of fun, I would turn on and watch Magpie on TV, which was the cool alternative to Blue Peter.
Tommy Boyd was on Magpie, and a fun fact here, without Tommy Boyd, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair now.
Was he the cute one with the curly hair?
Yes, he got me into radio.
What first interested you in Tommy Boyd?
You can read all about it in my forthcoming autobiography, John. Okay. On tomorrow's panel, Conservative Shadow Cabinet Minister Alex Burkhardt, Labour MP Luke Charters, The Spectator's Laura Brown, and the journalist and broadcaster Christina Patterson. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of what Donald Trump has done in Venezuela, but talk about what would happen. I mean, it's a bit of a what if this. What if Donald Trump launched a military operation, maybe call it a special military operation, and invaded Greenland and took control of a fellow NATO ally's territory? What would happen then? I want you to look into your 2026 crystal ball and tell me what you think the response of other NATO countries would be. I'll tell you what I think it should be. It should be to have a vote to expel the United States from NATO. Radical, yes. But what's the alternative to that?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
from Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The Foreign Secretary has told MPs the British government sheds no tears for the end of Nicolás Maduro's rule in Venezuela.
We should be under no illusion as to the nature of the Maduro regime. A once functioning democracy has become a hub for very dangerous organised criminal gangs.
But Yvette Cooper says she's urged the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to comply with international law. Maduro, who US forces captured at the weekend, has denied drugs and weapons charges at a court in New York. These people came out in London to protest America's actions.
The attack on Venezuela is illegal. To attack a sovereign nation is disgusting.
What has brought me is seeing the repetitive cycles of US imperialism and just in general the West exploiting places in the global South.
This can happen in any part of the world. No one can be safe after this act occurred in Venezuela.
Greenland's Prime Minister says the territory is hoping to improve relations with the United States and it can't be compared to Venezuela. Donald Trump has said America needs the Danish island. Sir Keir Starmer has told LBC he's looking at further support for hospitality firms about to be hit by higher business rates. They say a revaluation in April could force them to close. The Prime Minister says he wants to help.
There were reductions in place during COVID, which were always going to be unwound at some point. The overall rates are going to be lower, but I accept that because of re-evaluation, some will have their bills going up. We're talking to the sector, particularly hospitality and pubs, about what further support we can put in.
Peers have inflicted their first defeats against the government over the controversial UK handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The UK has agreed to lease back the site. The House of Lords backed to demand that the payments would cease if the military base on Diego Garcia could no longer be used. And Manchester United and Celtic are ending the day searching for new bosses. Ruben Amorim was sacked by United after appearing to criticise the owners yesterday. Celtic sacked Wilfried Nancy after 6 defeats in 8 games. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed above 10,000 for the first time in its history, up 53 points at 10,004. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.15. LBC weather. Snow showers clearing the east of England and easing further west. Very cold with a widespread frost and icy stretches. Cloudier in the north as a band of snow moves in. Lows of -12 to -3 Celsius. Tomorrow, rain and sleet in the north. Sunny spells in the south. Highs of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 5 minutes past 9 on LBC. Welcome to the programme if you've just joined us. If you have just joined us, you've missed a cracking 2 hours. The first hour we talked about Venezuela, the second hour obviously cross-question. And now we're going to return to the subject of Donald Trump and his... Well, I was going to say takeover of Venezuela. I'm not even sure that's an accurate word because he has put the vice president of Venezuela in charge and she was a close ally of Nicolás Maduro. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that works out. But a lot of people are asking, well, what now? What does Donald Trump do next? Because he's already warned the president of Colombia, which we all know is a drug-ridden state, and a lot of drugs that go to America emanate from Colombia. A lot of the drugs that come to this country come from Colombia. So Donald Trump would feel empowered, I guess, and emboldened to maybe do the same thing with Colombia. You look at the reaction of Latin American countries to what he's done in Venezuela, and quite a few of them seem to approve. He's warned Cuba of, I don't think he's accused the Cubans of drug running, but he's accused them of a lot of other things. And then he's turning his attention to Greenland. Well, this morning, LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, spoke with the Prime Minister and asked him about Trump's insistence that the US needs to take control of Greenland.
The future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And it's for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark only. Mm-hmm. Denmark is a close ally of the United Kingdom in Europe and a close ally in NATO. And so it's very important we stand by our ally and very clear about the future of Greenland.
And that's your message to Donald Trump as well when you speak to him next?
It's my consistent message in relation to Greenland. And so that's not a new position. It is the future for Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. They are a European ally, they're a NATO ally, and we stand with Denmark on this.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very different position for the one he's taken on Venezuela, where he's effectively sat on the fence. Now, to his credit, he's taken a very strong position on Greenland, unlike many of his European counterparts. Well, earlier in the programme, I spoke with the Danish journalist Morten Rønnelund, who told me how the government in Copenhagen is responding to Trump's words.
Our Prime Minister says if that happens, if we need to show up with military to repel American troops, then everything ends. That's her words. So no one isn't expecting that. Everybody is expecting some sort of negotiation about something. We don't precisely know what it is Donald Trump wants or the Americans want. And that's the peculiar thing about this whole situation. There hasn't been negotiations, there hasn't been any talks, any diplomacy before this all erupted out in the open. And maybe it's those kind of talks they want to have now to kind of walk it back and de-escalate.
And presumably your Prime Minister is on the phone to her counterparts throughout the European Union and indeed to London saying, look, I need support from you here. Now, Keir Starmer has given her his support today and said that he doesn't believe that the United States has any justification for doing this, which is more than he said about Venezuela. What's the reaction in other European capitals?
Well, the Danish reaction is many European capitals have been kind of quiet. It seems every nation has their own agenda regarding the Americans and Donald Trump, and no one is in a hurry to get into other fights. So if you're not directly involved with Greenland, why say anything about it? Why enrage Donald Trump? You probably have your own issues with him, with your nation. And that's where the Danish PM wants more of the European leaders to stand behind her and more NATO leaders to stand behind her and be a united front.
But in the end, this could lead to the breakup of NATO, couldn't it? Because if Donald Trump did launch some sort of military invasion of Greenland, I can't imagine that the United States could stay within NATO.
No, everything would actually end. I think our Prime Minister is right about that. What would anybody do about this if NATO collapsed? It would be like from one day to the other. What would the reaction be? Or should all other NATO states help Denmark, help Greenland, and wage into a war with the US? It seems unlikely.
Well, the only winner in this is Vladimir Putin, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. And maybe many European leaders are thinking, please, Trump, could you see this?
Interesting words there from Morten Rønnelund. I think Britain and other European nations are going to have a very big choice to make soon. Because if Donald Trump did, by military means, take over Greenland, and I'm not saying that is going to happen, but he's given... I used to think that it was a joke when he talked about taking over Greenland. Well, how misjudged was I? If he does it by military means, how could America possibly remain a member of NATO? And bear in mind that NATO is by far and away the biggest funder of NATO. That would present European nations with a big dilemma. But there will be calls at that time, and I can't say that I would necessarily be against this. I think there will be calls for all of the other nations to expel the United States from NATO. Now, if you had said to me that I could even contemplate that a few years ago, I would have thought you were losing your marbles. But we have to contemplate European security without America in future, do we not? Simon has just emailed me to say, Iain, we're in the early stages of World War III and we need to pick a side. Sorry, I just lost that on my screen. Let me just get it back. I'm going to... No, here we are. On the New World Order, belligerents, Russia, China and Iran. If Britain and Europe refuse to pick a side, then Europe will be the battlefield of the war between the USA, Israel, Five Eyes and Russia, China and Iran. My worry is that there are so many anti-Western, pro-Islamist supporters here that a Labour government would face huge pressure to align with Russia and China, but being piggy in the middle will be even worse. Well, it's maybe an extreme point to make, but I think there is something to that, don't you? 0345 6060 973. If Donald Trump took over Greenland or forced it into a situation where it just had to accept an American takeover, what should the response of Britain and other NATO allies be? So I'm inviting you to look into your crystal ball. Now, while you do that, on Cross Question within the last hour, Labour MP and Foreign Affairs Committee member Alex Ballinger told me this.
Whilst Trump does talk about the threat to Greenland, that the Russian spy ships, the Chinese devices and other things actually being real, and I think everyone accepts that, Denmark is a solid security partner of the United States and is very capable of working with the US and us and others to defend Greenland and to counter any of those threats in the appropriate way. So I think it's entirely misplaced for the Americans to think that they need to take Greenland. I think it's exceptionally unhelpful for them to continue to say that and to make these sort of threats. And I think the Prime Minister has been completely right to stand by Denmark and stand by Greenland in stating that it's up to the Danish and to the Greenlanders.
David says, re-Greenland, I agree. NATO members vote to kick out the US and immediately order all US troops and equipment out of the US bases in NATO countries. Well, can you imagine that happening? I mean, how terrible would that be to effectively break up the world order that is, or the security order that we've been used to for the last 80 years? It is almost inconceivable. We're getting to a point where we actually have to think about it. I hope this never happens. I hope that America realises that Britain and Europe are its main allies. But we're imagining scenarios that we just didn't think could be possible. Andrew says, Ian, you just said NATO is the biggest funder of NATO. I think you meant the USA is. I obviously do that, so just to clarify that. So we'll come to your calls in a moment. What happens next if Donald Trump does what some people think he's hinting that he might do and launch a takeover of Greenland? Because even if it isn't a military takeover, there are ways that big countries can force smaller countries into things. And Denmark, I mean, it's a country of, is it 5 million population? I think it's something like that. There is no way that Denmark could put up forces to repel an American invasion. I don't think there is any way that Britain, France, Germany, Sweden, or all the different other NATO countries would be willing to do that either. So Donald Trump might think, well, I can do what I've just done in Venezuela and go in. No American lives will be lost. What's not to like about that? I couldn't support that, could you? And if you don't support it, what do you think the international community should do in response? 0345 6060 973. There are just over 6 million people in Denmark, I've been told. Wasn't too far off. It's 9:15.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
17 minutes past 9 on LBC. If you haven't seen my social media over the past few hours and you haven't been listening to the other 2 hours of the programme, you won't know that you can now watch the entire 3-hour show every night on the Global Player, on the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel, or TikTok. And that is a new innovation for 2026. It's going to be permanent. We will be doing this every night. So if you've got a smart TV, you'll be able to watch us on your TV as well as listen to us on the radio. Richard is in Hackney. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Ian. I think if we're going to talk about America and NATO, one of the very first things that we should say, because this has been forgotten, in that all of the history of NATO, there's only been one country that's actually activated Article 5, which is an attack on one is an attack on all.
Yeah.
It said that we were attacked, we expect the rest of the NATO to turn up. And that country was America.
Indeed.
So when the current president is slightly sneery, slightly condescending, and frankly insulting about NATO, well, we paid with blood and treasure to come to their defence. All of the English soldiers, the UK soldiers, the Canadians, the French, all of the rest of them upheld their end of the bargain.
Well, to be fair, the French didn't, because they didn't help in Afghanistan. I don't think. Am I right? Am I right in that? I think I'm right in that.
I think you are. I think
if I'm wrong, I apologise.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that that seems to have been forgotten. It certainly seems to have been forgotten by the current American administration, and I just wanted to bring it back to as a kind of precursor of the conversation.
And I think that's a very fair point to make. I suppose the response from Donald Trump would be, yeah, but we still paid for it all.
Well, at the time, NATO, in the same way that UK, was seen as a very valuable forward posting points for American interests. I mean, do you remember how upset the Americans got when we suggested that maybe we didn't want to host their air bases in Greenland Common? And as for the stick the Germans took for basing American missiles in their country, so it's not been an entirely one-way commerce between NATO and the European countries and America.
No, and let me clarify that again. I was wrong. French forces were part of the NATO effort in Afghanistan. I think I was thinking of Iraq, but you are right on that.
But I mean, obviously, if one NATO country aggressed against another, they would have to be thrown out. There's no. I mean, I can't see any sophistry which gets around that.
No, I can't either. And if you think about it, I mean, let's say that there were two Eastern European members of NATO that went to war with each other. One of them would have to go. And I think you can't use a different principle just because it's the United States.
Of course not. But what worries me as well, what makes me think the groundwork is being laid for this, is I keep hearing this expression now, which is European NATO. And it's come up on panel shows and in chats and in some briefings. Well, that's a European NATO problem. And I just wonder if the groundwork isn't being laid, that's what it's going to be. Have you heard European NATO? And is it
I can't honestly say that I have. But what I would say is that, I mean, in a sense, part of the reason for doing this hour is to encourage people to think the unthinkable, because I think the unthinkable soon becomes the thinkable. And at some point, and at least I've been consistent on this, over the last year or two, I suppose ever since the Russians invaded Ukraine, I've consistently said that European nations have got to come to the realization that the old world has gone and that we are going to have to pay for our own defences, whether we like it or not. And that will mean some very tough decisions, because it's not sort of cutting like a couple of billion off one budget and then putting it onto defence. We're talking about tens of billions here that are going to be needed, not just in this country, but all around Europe. And we've got to persuade some of the countries, and I'm going to name the Republic of Ireland as one, which has been freeloading off the back of British defences for decades. They're going to have to pay their way as well, neutral country or not. And I think there are plenty of ordinary Irish people who understand that. Whether their politicians do, I don't know. And there are various other countries. I mean, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, she talks a good game. Italy's spending 1.2% of its GDP on defence at the moment. As Liz Truss might say, that is a disgrace. And countries like Italy and Ireland are going to have to step up to the plate in future.
Do you not think, though, that there's no way America is overspending on its defence? I mean, if you look at American education, American health system, America has an army which is 10 times larger. It's larger than the next 10 people, the next 10 countries, and 9 of which are its allies, or perhaps were its allies. There is a balance to these things, and I think America has gone too far in one way. And now that they have this enormous army, they have this enormous hammer, everything to them looks like a nail. President Trump has just said in his conversation to CBS, he phoned in, and he said, we may do this again, we will do this again, no one can stop us, talking about Venezuela and other countries.
Well, he's just done that in the last couple of hours.
No, he just after the Venezuelan incident, one of the first people he phoned was CBS, and he did an over-the-phone interview.
Right.
And that was one of the sentences he pulled out. But as far as NATO goes, do you not think that, in a way, the damage has already been done? The fact that we're sitting here now and saying, well, is America a dependable ally anymore? Now, we can say, well, in 4 years that will change, but maybe in 4 years from then it will change back again. Once the sort of rot is set in, can we ever depend on the US again? If we're really sitting here saying, well, we have to think about how well we can defend ourselves against them, you don't go back from that mindset.
No, look, I think we have to learn from history here. And America has always had a very strong isolationist streak within it. It's never really, I mean, apart from being involved in the two world wars, traditionally it has very much adopted an America First policy. I mean, even up to the entry into the Second World War, that was the case. And I think that strand of opinion is still very latent, particularly in the middle of America, not necessarily on the east or the west coast, but the sort of the vast middle of the USA. And I understand that because, I mean, look, every country, in a sense, if their government doesn't use the equivalent of America First, then they're probably not a very good government, because you've obviously got to consider your own nation's interests above those of anybody else. I mean, why wouldn't you if you're the government of a particular country? But since America took on an international role post-World War II, or during World War II and then post-World War II, nobody's really questioned that until the last 10 or 15 years. And I think we're still struggling to come to terms with that, aren't we?
I think one thing that you and I would absolutely agree on, not that we've disagreed so far, but we would absolutely agree on, is that if you'd have given Vladimir Putin a list, which was the EU will be weakened because the UK will have left, NATO will be weakened because America wants to leave, the international rule of law will have been weakened because a strong country has gone into a weak country and taken it over, and no one said anything, he would have thought all of his Christmases came at once. Up
to a point, I think you're right. I mean, I've never really bought into the whole sort of, Britain leaving the EU reduces our defences.
That would be a sticking point between us.
I think it probably is, but I don't, because, I mean, up until there was until the EU was actually formed in 1992, there was no European foreign policy.
Yep.
That it started with the creation of the EU in 1992. And the EU has never really developed a very strong foreign policy that was coordinated between all the member states. It's never really had a defensive security policy. I mean, that has started to be created. You're absolutely right. But I think if we were 10 or 20 years down the road, I think you probably would have a point that Britain withdrawing if we were still members in 20 years, probably would have a severe effect on European security policy. But I think the response to the invasion of Ukraine, which Britain led, I mean, it wasn't the EU that was leading on that. It was us. And in terms of military support for Ukraine, it was us who started it all off. I don't think that European defences have been weakened by Britain leaving the EU. But as you say, we'll probably disagree on that.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take us down that particular rabbit hole. I was just saying it was overall the general weakening of the EU is something that Vladimir Putin would desire.
Yes.
Now, whether we agree or disagree that the UK leaving the EU has weakened us both is neither here nor there. It's something that Putin wanted, a weaker EU. He wanted a weaker NATO. He wanted a weaker international rule of law. And I think he's got all three.
Well, Richard, you've been on for a long time, which sometimes means that I haven't got any other calls to go to. But on this occasion, I have a long conversation. So thank you very much indeed. Callum's in Newcastle. Hello, Callum.
Hey, Ian, how are you doing? Happy New Year.
And to you. What would you like to say?
So I agree with Trump kidnapping or taking over Venezuela's leader. And the reason why I say that is probably why you probably agree with me on this point, is you've not heard any Venezuelan person have an argument against it. I'm not saying the political correctness is correct, but I'm just, as in any Venezuelan person. I know you had somebody on it around 7 o'clock time. They were on and they said how happy they were that it happened. They just didn't want it to be Trump, but they had nobody else to go to, etc. But do you agree with me? Do you not feel like this is now the start of World War III?
Well, that's what that email said that I read out from Simon. I don't, if I'm honest, no. Maybe that's wishful thinking on my part. I don't know what would constitute as World War III. I think if America and China went to war, inevitably that would be seen as World War III, but I don't think we're anywhere near that.
The reason why I disagree is because Trump has done what he's done. He's now justified the whole reason of why Putin's went into Ukraine. Because Putin went into Ukraine from an outsider. Obviously, I don't know the ins and outs, but from what I've seen is Putin thought that NATO was trying to take control of his country and take control of his borders. So he went, right, I'm going to take control of Ukraine. Right? Obviously, I know everything he's done in that country is completely wrong. It's vile to discuss, and especially the way he's killed innocent children and women, etc. But he's now justified that. He's now justified China going to attack Taiwan. If he goes towards Greenland and just, even let's say he takes the top 25% of Greenland, leaves the bottom 75% for Denmark, and he says, I'll take the top 25%. This is for us. This is for my, soldiers, my army base, this, and this. I just feel like he's now pressed the red button, but not meant to press the red button, if that makes sense.
Well, I hope you're wrong. I genuinely hope you're wrong.
So you are.
Yeah, well, for all of our sakes, and particularly for those who, if there was another world war, would inevitably be called up and lose their lives. Nobody wants that to happen. And it's I don't envy not just British political leaders, but those throughout the rest of Europe and indeed further afield, who are going to have to make the decision as to how to respond to any further escalation. Callum, thank you very much indeed. Now, after the news, we'll be discussing the tax bombshell set to hit the hospitality sector this spring, and I'll be joined by the owner of the famous central London restaurant Pied à Terre. 0345 6060 973. Keep your calls coming. We're going to spend the next half an hour, apart from talking about hospitality, on what happens if Greenland falls to America. It's 9:32 on LBC. Matt Hewitt has the news headlines.
Venezuela's Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, has been formally sworn in as the country's interim leader. She's replaced Nicolás Maduro, who was captured by US forces along with his wife in an attack on Venezuela at the weekend. Greenland's Prime Minister says the territory is hoping to improve relations with the United States, and it can't be compared to Venezuela. President Trump has said America needs the Danish island. Peers have inflicted their first defeats against the government over the controversial UK handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The House of Lords backed a demand that lease payments would cease if the military base on Diego Garcia could no longer be used. LBC weather. Snow showers clearing the east of England and easing further west. Very cold with a widespread frost and icy stretches. Cloudier in the north as a band of snow moves in. Lows of -12 to -3 Celsius.
This is LBC.
The famous
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
9:35 on LBC. Now, Natasha Clark, our political editor, she's been talking to Keir Starmer today. She gets all the big interviews. And he's told her that he's considering offering further support, his words, not mine, to companies affected by increases to business rates. Well, if you are in the hospitality sector and if you run a small business, you are probably very worried about what's going to happen in April. Let's hear what Keir Starmer had to say.
Obviously, what's happened is there were reductions in place during COVID, which were always going to be unwound at some point. The overall rates are going to be lower, but I accept that because of re-evaluation, that means that some will have their bills going up. We're putting in place transitional relief. We're talking to the sector, particularly hospitality and pubs, about what further support we can put in, whether that's licensing freedoms or other measures. We want to talk to the sector. I want to keep working with them to make sure we can work this through.
Then this afternoon, LBC's Tom Swarbrick was joined in our studio by the TV chef and pub owner Tom Kerridge. And he gave us another insight into how ministers are responding to the struggles affecting businesses like pubs, bars and restaurants.
I had a conversation this morning with Peter Cole, Business and Trade Secretary of State. So I was at an event pre-Christmas where I kind of jumped on him and said, listen, this is just as these business rates, all the kind of flaw was coming out of it. I said, this isn't. We are in a lot of trouble here. The hospitality industry is in.
Were you that diplomatic?
No, actually, I think I might have even used a couple of expletives. We are not in a good space. And to be fair to him, this was was just before Christmas. The organisation, he invited me in. Let's have a sit down, a conversation, and talk about it. And the piece of paper that I have in front of me with my rateable values and the new rateable values, that he presented that to me. He had done his research. He'd done his. So, to be fair, he was listening. He's trying to understand.
I see.
How they can react to it, I have absolutely no idea. There are so many issues. It's not just the rateable value that is pressing on hospitality.
David Moore is the owner of the Michelin Stars Central London restaurant Pied à Terre and joins me now. David, very good evening to you. Just can you lay it out for our listeners exactly what businesses like yours are facing at the moment?
So, just gone through, we've come out of COVID. We spent a couple of years bouncing along the bottom. We came back out to with quite a strong trade, and then we've had 24 months of relentless inflation across everything. We've had cost increases across the board on everything. Also, Rachel's not been very kind to us with that little raid last year, which I didn't in any hope of any profitability. I can't. When people ask me what the new horizon is, I say, you know what? It's survival. Let's not even think about making a profit anymore. All we want to do is stem the losses. And the new horizon is actually at this break even. And I heard Keir saying today that the business rates were at this level before COVID, and it was always going to unwind. The issue is, it was always wrong and a broken system, even way before COVID. I can give you some context on this in terms of rent and rates. So, Pied à Terre has been on Charlotte Street for 35 years. 1991, December 16 was our very first day of trading. Our rent then was 48,000. Our rates was 11. Now my rent, 35 years on, is 135,000. So almost a 3 times multiplier. My rates, business rates, 63. That's just under a 6 times multiplier across the last 35 years. It has gone out exponentially against the business world. And what's it for? What do I pay business rates for? Why do I pay business rates? I don't understand it.
Because that's on top of all the other taxes that you're paying, national insurance, corporation tax, etc., etc. And it seems incredible. And I remember when I owned a retail business that it got to the point where my rates were more than my rent, and I was thinking, well, how can that possibly be allowed to happen?
It's totally bonkers. Really, really bonkers. And we look at the system being broken. How do we fix it? In the US, you go in and you look at a price on a shop, and it says $11.50, and you go to the cash register and they ask you for $13.25. There's a sales tax there, which is a transactional tax, which seems like a fair way to do it. Why do I pay $63,000? I'll give you another anecdotal bête noire of mine. There is one freestanding house on Charlotte Street, which is exactly the same footage as Pied à Terre. It's a 5-story townhouse. The gentleman who owns that pays £3,000 in council tax. I pay £63,000 in business rates. He gets his rubbish collected included in the £3,000. I have to pay another £17,000 to have my rubbish collected for my business. 17 on top of the 63. And 2 weeks ago, before Christmas, oh bless her, one of my team put the wrong rubbish in the wrong bag and put it on the street at 1 o'clock in the morning. And there was what do they call themselves? An officer, warden, snapped a photograph of her. I got £1,000 fine.
Oh my goodness.
£1,000 fine for about 500 grams of rubbish in the wrong bag. That to me is a knock on the door. Hey mate, your girl yesterday, she did this. You should know about it. If it happens again, we'll do something. And then they said, oh, well, don't worry. If you pay $500 now. So we had to pay a £500 fine for a bag of rubbish that costs £1.35 to get delivered that my man down the road, John, gets his rubbish collected for free. Well, I say for free. It's included in his council tax.
And
don't get me started on that subject.
Okay, well, I can understand that. And just finally, because the line's a bit dodgy, but what would you like to hear the Prime Minister say, and what would you like him to do?
Now, I don't take anything from this comment that he said about liberalising licensing laws and freedoms. We need to have a check. We need to cut a check here. We need to have business rates that are sensible, that are comparable, that are fair. You know, if you have an Amazon superstore out in the Milton Keynes district and you're turning 35 million out of there and you're only paying £12,000 business rates, it's not right or fair.
Yeah.
It all needs re-looking at, and I don't know that there's a simple answer. But you know, the American system of the sales tax, it works in America.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, David. We'll leave it there because, as I say, the line isn't the best. Thank you very much, though. David Moore owns the Michelin-starred central London restaurant Pied à Terre. Right, let's go back to your calls on what Donald Trump might do in Greenland and what the consequences of that might be. Let's go to Max, who's a new caller in Surbiton. Hi, Max.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I think Trump sees the world in terms of very hard economic and military power. And if the US does take Greenland by force, he knows that he will lose Europe as allies. And I think importantly, we have to remember that the GDP of Europe is about 30 trillion, which is about equal to the US. So if the US does invade Greenland, he would make a new enemy that is equal in strength economically to him. Yeah.
I'm not sure those figures are right. I think the GDP of Europe as a whole is way lower than America.
Well, it's not too much difference. It may be about 10 trillion different, but he would create a new enemy, a new bloc that does threaten US interests and US strength.
Well, he would say yes, but he's dealing with that now by putting big tariffs on unfair competition with Europe.
Well, I just think his statements are meant to change the behavior of leaders around the world, and they're not necessarily to outline his plans. And I mean, Europe are by far the largest customers of the US as far as military equipment, etc. goes. I think he's far more likely to try and buy Greenland or make some kind of a deal, which is fair and legal if all parties are in agreement.
But he has to recognise that if the Danes say not for sale, I mean, there's no deal to be done, and they're within their rights to say that as a sovereign country.
I completely agree with that. I think he's trying to put pressure on Europe. He's trying to put pressure on the Danes to make a deal. But I don't think he will go for the military route. I just think that's a little far-fetched.
Well, I hope you're right, and I'd like to think that you were right, but I'm not 100% convinced that you are. Max, thank you very much indeed. We'll take more of your calls in a moment. Just to say, in 2024, the US GDP was around 28.8 trillion compared to the EU's 19.5 trillion. So, I mean, that's a 30% difference. That is quite a difference, isn't it? It's 9:45.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Henry Riley.
Just 5 days into the new year after capturing the corrupt Venezuelan president, Donald Trump's now set his sights once again on Greenland. I'm starting to think the FIFA Peace Prize isn't all it's made out to be.
Henry Riley at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
When it comes
Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
9:48 on LBC. Just to say, there's a new episode of the Where Politics Meets History podcast with me and Tessa Dunlop. That will be downloaded on your phones at 1 o'clock in the morning, but only if you subscribe. So do subscribe to our podcast. Obviously, we talk a lot about Venezuela, and I think it's a really, really interesting discussion. We try and relate what's happened over the weekend to recent events in history, particularly with regard to Panama. Remember General Noriega when George H.W. Bush deposed him in 1989? Or was it 1990? I think it was 89. Right, back to your calls on Greenland. Alex is a new caller in Bristol. Good evening, Alex.
Yeah, good evening, Ian, and thanks for having me on your show. I think, I said to your research, I think, and you're probably not going to like this, but I think people are probably getting a little bit hysterical over this. In my view, Greenland is nothing like Venezuela. And I think you hit the nail on the head just a minute ago. The Americans have got form on doing this type of thing. Panama is one example. Grenada is another example. Obviously, there was a Bay of Pigs in Cuba. They've dabbled in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, you name it. They've created havoc in South America. I think...
Or you could put it the other way. In some of those countries, you could say they've created order. I doubt whether there are many Panamanians who would say that they would want Noriega back.
Look, listen. I'm the pretense that Trump has come up with to get rid of Maduro is he was a criminal and heavily into drug running. There were hostile influences in Venezuela, Iran, China, Russia.
All of that is true.
Yeah. And I kind of get that. And, I guess the third reason was the legitimacy of, Maduro's presidency. And again, I totally get that. But the fact remains that, if you try and apply that logic to Greenland, there's not a leg to stand on, because you can't apply those type of metrics to a country that, isn't a threat to America. And, the only kind of reason that America wants to take Greenland is for the resources and for its strategic positioning. So my view is that, if he went, first of all, if he assembled forces on Greenland, it would be, absolutely visible to everyone, as he did with Venezuela. He had one of the biggest, forces in the Caribbean for God knows how long, and everyone knew that, it was a signal for action. So first of all, if he did that with Greenland, everyone would know about it, because you just don't invade a country that size with, a small amphibious force.
Well, I'm not sure you're right on that.
Well,
I mean, if you think about what the population of Greenland actually is, which I'm about to be furnished with that information. He says, looking at Chris. But you look at that, and you look at the size of the Danish armed forces. I mean, they could walk in there with sort of probably 500 people and still be able to take it.
Okay. Look, listen. The other kind of point I've got to make on this, is that, Trump's got a wafer-thin majority in Congress and the Senate. And, they're already putting legal challenges, Congress are, in terms of the invasion of Venezuela. He's got the midterms coming up. Is it November, I think, this year? Yeah. So, he's effectively, got 11 months to invade Greenland? Because I'm pretty damn sure, signals that I'm getting, because my cousin lives in America. And, I've got family, I come from, my dad was Ghanaian, which is next to Venezuela. So I really think that, people are overestimating what Trump can do, because I think if he does...
But I don't think he doesn't need congressional approval to do this sort of thing, does he?
Well, Congress, the Democrats have a different view on it at the moment. They're pushing for a vote in Congress to try and, because they're saying that, he's going to war with Venezuela. Whether or not that's right or wrong, I'm not an expert in that type of legal area. But, they're definitely pushing for that. And I think the other kind of point I would like to make is, whilst I think one of your callers said the trade, the GDP in the States is on par with Europe. It's not. It's 28 billion to 19 billion, I think, something like that.
Yeah, exactly right.
But 19 trillion. But 19 trillion is a massive sum. And if Trump invaded Greenland, then whilst Europe couldn't fight back militarily because they just haven't got the hardware or the resources or whatever, they would react. I'm pretty sure that the Europeans would say, right, enough is enough, and we get into massive sanctions and a trade war, and that will have devastating impacts in terms of the markets. And we've seen what Trump does when the markets start to tumble. We chickens out, and I really think that Trump has basically picked on Venezuela because it's a soft touch. He knew he could go in there. He knew that the resistance would be pretty futile. He knew he had people, the Americans had people on the inside, and it was an easy win for them. Where Trump has come up against tougher resistance and situations where he knows he's going to, with China, for example, in a trade war with China, they didn't back down, and he backed down in the end. With Russia, he picks his fights, and he's a bully, and he's obviously picked a fight with a country and a president. I'm not sticking up for Maduro because I think he's an absolute dictator and probably deserved to go. And again, the legal, twos and fours in terms of was it against international law? It probably was. But I think most people will see the benefits and be glad to see the back of Maduro because
I think I think you're right. I think a lot of what you said is on the money there. Thank you very much, Alex. Shailesh says no one mentioned Grenada. Well, I have mentioned Grenada a couple of times. Let me just read you out this quote from Margaret Thatcher, her reaction to the American invasion of Grenada in 1983. She concludes by saying, if you are pronouncing a new law that wherever communism reigns against the will of the people, even though it's happened internally, there the United States shall enter, then we're going to have some really terrible wars in the world. Wise words as ever. Shailesh continues, this will blow over and the Europeans will ignore this for convince sake. I don't understand that. The US has a habit of changing regimes in South America. Remember the 70s and 80s, Nicaragua springs to mind. Trump will finish his presidency soon. Things will move on. Well, he may finish his presidency soon, but who's to say that the next president won't be J.D. Vance? I mean, think about that. Let's go to Tony in Leighton. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Tony. Hi, Ian. I think it's the first time I've called you, actually. I don't know if you've spoken before, but before I start, I must say you are one of my favorite presenters in LBC. I don't normally agree with you all the time, but
who does?
You give people, you give people a fair view. And actually, I do normally find myself listening in amusement when you kind of challenge the people about phoning up supporting Russia, for instance. But it's actually on that note that I'm now going to address, because I do feel about what Trump has done. To answer your question, if he went into Greenland, I did tell your presenter, I don't think he would. But if he did, I really don't think that much would happen. I really think that we're now in a place in the world where it's all about the bullies. And I actually suspect that meeting that Trump had with Putin, they were not talking about how Trump was going to concede anything to Ukraine. Because Putin Trump himself already knew what he was going to do in his backyard. And I think amongst themselves, it's kind of like, this is our territory. We run things in South America. We'll leave you, Putin, to sort out Ukraine. And I think maybe Europe to Trump, we're just like a nuisance, like a pest to him. Because if not for us, I think Russia would have had its way with Ukraine, because America wouldn't have done anything. And I think America is just consolidating its bases in where it's got its sphere of influence. Now, you know that word, Ian, because all of the Russian, apologists, that's what they've been quoting. And, I never used to agree with them at all before, but Trump is just blowing it open and said, this is what it's all about. This is our backyard. We do what we want to do in South America. And we're all busy right now trying to find excuses as to, Maduro wasn't a nice guy. Yeah, we know he wasn't a nice guy, but what about the leaders of Saudi Arabia? The ones that killed somebody and in the Turkish embassy? What's happened to them? Nice guys, bullies or dictators, they thrive if they are kind of like amenable to the power.
They thrive when they think they can get away with stuff. And I'm afraid I'm not calling Trump a dictator, but I think he will do whatever he thinks he can get away with. Tony, thank you very much indeed for your call. Well, thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store right now. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Richard Spur. But right now, in for Ben Kentish, it's Henry Riley.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yes, good evening at 10 o'clock.
We need Greenland from a national security situation, and the European Union needs us to have it. And they...
Donald Trump now turns his attention once again to Greenland, as you've been hearing, after deposing the Venezuelan president Maduro. Is this a man whose aim is really peace? And what of the Prime Minister speaking with LBC?
The future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, and it's for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark only.
Strong enough, or should Sir Keir take a tougher approach to the US president? Also,
children are particularly susceptible to food advertising. It creates that desire for less healthy foods, and it really makes life difficult for parents.
From today, there's a ban on junk food advertising before 9 p.m. on TV. Does seeing a Big Mac at midday really drive childhood obesity?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, Venezuela's Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, has been formally sworn in as the country's interim leader. She's replaced Nicolás Maduro, who was captured by US forces at the weekend. Sir Keir Starmer says the UK will shed no tears over Mr Maduro's removal. His predecessor as Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, told LBC it could backfire against the US president.
Public opinion in the USA, for all the bombast of Trump, the idea that he's going to lead them into foreign wars that are out of control, he could find that he becomes a very unpopular president very, very quickly.
Earlier, Mr Maduro pleaded not guilty to drugs charges. Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey believes him to be a brutal, illegitimate dictator.
But that does not give President Trump a free pass for illegal action. This wasn't about liberating the Venezuelan people. This is about Trump believing he can grab anything he wants, this time oil.
The UN Security Council has been discussing the legality of the situation and heard a statement on behalf of its Secretary-General.
I remain deeply concerned that rules of international law have not been respected with regard to the 3 January military action.
The Danish president's warned Donald Trump's repeated suggestions about going into Greenland next shouldn't be underestimated.
If the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops.
Mette Frederiksen has been speaking after the US president claimed his country needs the Danish territory. Sir Keir Starmer's told LBC he's considering offering further support to companies affected by increases to business rates. A revaluation means many hospitality companies are facing much higher bills from April. David Moore is owner of the central London restaurant Pied à Terre.
When people ask me what the new horizon is, I said it's survival. And I heard Keir saying today that business rates were at this level before COVID and it was always going to unwind. The issue is it was always wrong and a broken system.
Peers have inflicted multiple defeats against the government over the controversial UK handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The House of Lords wants to know the total cost of the deal to lease back the military base on Diego Garcia. And the ministers insisted it is appropriate for the government to keep posting on an app that has let users generate images of minors in minimal clothing. The watchdog Ofcom says it's made urgent contact with X. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 53 points at 10,004. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.15. LBC weather, a clear and cold night for many. Patchy snow in Scotland, possibly moving into northern England and Wales at dawn. Lows of -12. Bright in the south tomorrow, but snow and rain showers in the north. A high of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Henry Riley.
Good evening. 3 minutes past 10 is the time you're listening to Henry Riley here on LBC. Later this hour,
hundreds of anti-war protesters gather in central London with the message, hands off Venezuela. LBC's Helen Hodnott outside Downing Street.
Protests outside 10 Downing Street calling for Maduro to be freed and reinstalled as Venezuelan president. A full report later on. Also, a ban on junk food advertising has come into effect. That means that this is banned.
It's the Milky Bar Kid.
The Milky Bar Kid is strong and tough.
The Milky Bar Kid is a no, but remember that Cadbury's advert. Yeah, the gorilla playing the drums. Well, that won't be banned because there's no identifiable product in it. Have we really thought this through? Also,
for many people at work, the real risks to safety and health aren't, the traditional things we associate with heavy lifting or chemicals. It's actually stress and workload pressures.
That's Paul Novak from the Trade Union Congress. As work-related stress is now deemed a growing national crisis, does that apply to you with your job? And later in the show, newly released documents reveal that military chiefs ordered an urgent UFO probe in the 1990s after a mysterious sighting after midnight. Have you ever seen something that you struggled to explain?
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. This is LBC.
And a very good evening to you. 4 minutes past 10 is the time you're listening to Henry Riley here on LBC. In for Ben Kentish, and I'm with you all of this week, with you here tonight until 1, well, I suppose tomorrow, technically, until 1 a.m. It's just 5 days into the new year. We've seen Donald Trump yet again hinting, it's like sort of deja vu. Manchester United have got no manager, and Donald Trump talking about taking Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark, something that would surely risk the future of the NATO alliance. Now, after striking Venezuela and capturing the president, Nicolás Maduro, the restless, unpredictable US president, and that's probably understating it, has reignited his perennial campaign to take over Greenland.
We'll worry about Greenland in about 2 months. Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days. By the way, I will say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and the European Union needs us to have it, and they know that.
The US president speaking in the last 24 hours. What of our Prime Minister? Surely he's furious to hear a fellow NATO ally talking about claiming territory from another. Well, during a visit to Berkshire, he gave this reaction to LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark.
The future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And it's for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark only. Mm-hmm. Denmark is a close ally of the United Kingdom in Europe. And a close ally in NATO. And so it's very important we stand by our ally and very clear about the future of Greenland.
And that's your message to Donald Trump as well when you speak to him next?
It's my consistent message in relation to Greenland. And so that's not a new position. It is the future for Greenland is for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. They are a European ally, they're a NATO ally, and we stand with Denmark on this.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm keen to explore with you this hour is what you heard then, that response from the Prime Minister. Is it feeble? Is it sort of almost supine from our Prime Minister? Or what else is he meant to do? We'll come to your thoughts on that in a moment. And I am starting to wonder, by the way, whether this FIFA Peace Prize was all it was made out to be that Donald Trump was in receipt of a few months ago. Now, this comes as Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro claims he is still president and pleads not guilty to drug trafficking charges and other charges during an appearance at a New York court. This, of course, after he was seized from Caracas, the capital, in the early hours of Saturday and flown to the United States. Delcy Rodriguez is currently, his deputy, by the way, is currently being sworn in as Venezuela's interim president and has praised Maduro and his wife as heroes. Not a view shared by our Foreign Secretary. This was Yvette Cooper in the House of Commons.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we should be under no illusion as to the nature of the Maduro regime.
A once functioning democracy has become a hub for very dangerous organised criminal gangs. Corrupt links involved Iran, with Hezbollah increasingly present in recent years, as well as malign support from Russia.
And where does this leave the United States? Well, longtime Venezuela supporter and leader of your party, Jeremy Corbyn, told my colleague Andrew Marr.
Public opinion in the USA, for all the bombast of Trump, the tariffs are not popular. The unemployment is not popular. The poverty is not